After the fire at my house reduced decades of memories to ashes, my own daughter and son-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You cannot live with us because our comfort comes first." I just smiled, booked a room at a cheap motel, and stopped their monthly payments of $50,000. 3 hours later, I had 33 missed calls. Before I tell you how I burned down their perfect little world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect should be earned, not demanded. My name is Malcolm Wright. I am 69 years old, and this is the story of how I taught my ungrateful daughter a lesson she will never forget. The smell of charred wood and melted plastic clung to my skin like a second layer of clothing. At 2 a.m, a faulty electrical wire had turned my modest townhouse in a quiet Atlanta suburb into a blazing inferno. I had barely made it out with the clothes on my back and a small fireproof lockbox I managed to grab before the roof caved in. Now I was standing on the pristine front porch of a sprawling 8-bedroom mansion in Buckhead, soaking wet as the icy November rain washed the soot down my face. My bones ached and my lungs burned from the smoke inhalation, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I pressed the glowing doorbell of the estate I had secretly funded. I came seeking refuge, a temporary roof over my head for my only child. Instead, I found out exactly what I meant to her. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing my white son-in-law, Logan. He stood there in a silk bathrobe, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. He did not ask if I was hurt. He did not ask if I needed a doctor. He stepped back, holding his nose as if my very presence was infecting his pristine foyer. "Malcolm, what the hell happened to you?" Logan sneered, his voice dripping with annoyance rather than concern. "You smell like a campfire, and you are dripping mud all over the imported marble." "My house burned down, Logan," I said, my voice raspy from the smoke. "I lost everything. I need a place to stay for the night." Before Logan could answer, my daughter Naomi appeared at the top of the grand sweeping staircase. She wore a designer silk set, her hair perfectly blown out, looking annoyed that her sleep had been interrupted. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she stopped a good 5 feet away from me. "Dad, what are you doing here at this hour?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Naomi, my house is gone," I repeated, staring into the eyes of the little girl I had raised alone after her mother Camille passed away. "There was a fire. I need to stay in one of your guest rooms just until I can sort things out with the insurance." Naomi exchanged a long, heavy look with Logan. The silent conversation they had spoke volumes. Logan sighed and leaned against the doorway, blocking my path. "Look, Malcolm, tomorrow is a huge day for my tech startup," Logan said, waving his scotch glass dismissively. "I am hosting a major seed funding pitch right here in the living room. I am expecting high-level angel investors. We cannot have the house smelling like a burnt barbecue, and we certainly cannot have you wandering around looking like a homeless person. It is bad for the brand." I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to reprimand her husband, waiting for her to act like the child I had sacrificed my youth to raise. Instead, Naomi sighed and nodded in agreement. "Dad, Logan is right," she said, her tone devoid of any warmth. "You cannot stay here. It is just too stressful for us right now. Tomorrow is crucial for his career, and our comfort has to come first. I will call you a car. You should just go to a motel for the night. We will check on you later this week." I stood there on the porch, the freezing rain soaking through my ruined jacket. The daughter I had broken my back for, the daughter I had sworn to protect, was turning me out into the street because my trauma was inconvenient for her husband's aesthetic. I did not argue. I did not beg. A 30-year career building a national logistics empire from the ground up had taught me one fundamental rule of survival: never negotiate with people who do not value your presence. I simply nodded, turned my back on them, and walked away before the door clicked shut. I did not wait for her car. I walked 3 miles through the freezing rain until I found a cheap rundown motel off the highway. I paid for the room in cash using the damp bills I had salvaged from my lockbox. The room smelled of old cigarettes and bleach, but to me, it was a war room. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at the peeling wallpaper. Naomi and Logan thought this massive mansion belonged to them. They believed Logan's fake tech startup was so promising that his imaginary venture capital firm had secured the deed for their lifestyle. They loved bragging to their country club friends about their estate. What Naomi did not know, what she was too arrogant to ever investigate, was that the venture capital firm holding the mortgage was a blind shell company created by my lawyer, Vincent Russo. And the sole owner of that company was me. Every single month for the last 2 years, my private trust had been paying the $50,000 mortgage and maintenance fees to keep my daughter living like royalty. I had promised my late wife Camille that I would always provide for our girl. But Camille also made me promise never to raise a parasite. I opened the small fireproof lockbox on the motel desk and pulled out my laptop. It had survived the blaze perfectly intact. I connected to the unstable motel internet and navigated through the heavily encrypted portals of my private banking network. The screen cast a cold blue light across the cramped room. I watched the scheduled transactions menu load. There it was, the monthly auto draft of $50,000 slated to hit Logan and Naomi's luxury estate account at 5 in the morning. For 2 years, I had allowed myself to be treated like an irrelevant poor old man just to ensure my daughter was happy. I had worn cheap suits and lived in a modest townhouse because true wealth operates in silence while fake wealth demands an audience. Logan thought he was the master of his domain, a tech genius supporting a lavish lifestyle. In reality, he was nothing but a fragile house of cards propped up by the very man he had just left out in the freezing rain. I moved the cursor over the active payment profile. I did not feel an ounce of sadness. The father who would have given them the world died on their front porch an hour ago. The man sitting in this motel room was the ex-Marine who had crushed corporate rivals without losing a night of sleep. I clicked delete. A confirmation prompt appeared on the screen. I clicked confirm. The payment was permanently canceled. The financial life support was officially pulled. I closed the laptop, wiped the soot from my face with a cheap motel towel, and lay down on the hard mattress. I listened to the rain hitting the window, and for the first time in years, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep of absolute peace. When I woke up 3 hours later, the sun was just beginning to peek through the thin curtains. I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. 33 missed calls, 28 text messages, all from Naomi, all desperate. The bank had processed the rejected payment. The black card had bounced. The velvet rope of their false reality had just snapped. The money had stopped, and my revenge had just begun. By 9 in the morning, the consequences of my single keystroke had begun to manifest in the real world. I stood by the grime-streaked window of my motel room, nursing a cup of lukewarm, bitter coffee, and watched the drama unfold on the screen of my secondary phone. I had set up an alert system months ago tied to the black card I had provided them. The alerts were meant to flag fraudulent charges, but today they were broadcasting a symphony of declined transactions. The first casualty was the matte black Porsche 911 sitting in their pristine driveway. Logan loved that car. He polished it more often than he showed affection to my daughter. He bragged that it was a company vehicle, a perk of being a successful tech founder. In reality, it was a lease, and the monthly payment of $2,800 had just bounced hard. My phone pinged with the notification from the luxury leasing company. Payment failed, account suspended. 10 minutes later, I received a live feed notification from the security cameras I had installed around the mansion. A heavy-duty tow truck backed up the long, sweeping driveway. I watched a grim satisfaction settling in my chest as the driver calmly hooked up the Porsche. Logan burst out of the front door, his silk robe flapping, waving his arms and yelling at the driver. The tow truck driver, immune to the tantrums of the wealthy, simply handed Logan a clipboard pointed to the signature line and drove away with the prized vehicle. Logan stood in the driveway, staring at the empty space, looking smaller and more pathetic than ever. The silence in my motel room was broken less than an hour later. The cheap hollow core door rattled under a series of heavy, frantic knocks. It wasn't a polite tap. It was the sound of entitlement demanding entry. I took another sip of my awful coffee, set the cup down, and opened the door. Naomi and Logan stood there looking entirely out of place in the dingy hallway of the budget motel. Naomi was wearing a trench coat over her designer pajamas, her eyes wide and frantic. Logan, fully dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than the motel itself, looked flushed and furious. The arrogance was still there, but it was edged with a creeping panic. "Dad, what is going on?" Naomi demanded, pushing past me into the small room without an invitation. My card was declined at the country club this morning. It was so embarrassing. And Logan's car, they took his car. Logan followed her inside, pacing the small space like a trapped animal, his expensive leather shoes scuffing against the stained carpet. "Malcolm, you need to call your bank immediately. There is obviously a massive glitch in their system. The auto draft failed and the black card is frozen. You need to fix this right now." I closed the door, slowly leaning against it, and observed them. There was no concern for my well-being, no questions about how I had slept after losing my home, no apologies for turning me away in the freezing rain the night before. They were here solely because the golden goose had stopped dispensing eggs. A glitch, you say? I replied, my voice steady and low. The kind of voice I used to use during hostile takeovers right before I dismantled a competitor's company. Yes, a glitch, Logan snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Call your wealth manager. Threaten to pull your accounts if you have to. This is unacceptable. I have investors arriving in hours and I cannot have them see my car missing. It ruins the optics. I watched Logan's panicked pacing and a wave of cold clarity washed over me. For years I had allowed this boy to play the role of the successful entrepreneur, shielding Naomi from the harsh realities of the business world. I had built my logistics empire right supply chain solutions from a single leased delivery truck into a multi-state operation worth hundreds of millions. I knew what real struggle looked like. I knew what it meant to sweat over payroll to negotiate contracts that meant the difference between survival and bankruptcy to build something tangible. Logan knew none of this. He was a master of buzzwords, of synergies and disruptive paradigms, but he had never built anything of substance. His entire tech startup was a mirage sustained entirely by the silent, steady flow of my money. He believed his own hype, completely blind to the fact that his foundation was made of my generosity. And now he was standing in a cheap motel room demanding I fix his life. There is no glitch. Logan, I said, stepping away from the door and moving toward the small desk where my laptop sat. The system worked exactly as I instructed it to. Naomi stopped her frantic pacing and stared at me, confusion knitting her brow. What do you mean you instructed it to, Dad? Did you do something? I looked at my daughter, the girl I had promised her mother I would protect. I canceled the payments, Naomi. All of them. The mortgage, the car leases, the black card. The bank accounts are frozen. Logan's face turned an ugly shade of mottled red. You did what? Are you insane? You cannot just cut off the funding without warning. We have financial obligations. We have a lifestyle to maintain. You have a lifestyle that I maintain, I corrected him, my tone devoid of any warmth. And last night you both made it very clear that my comfort, my basic needs are secondary to your image. You told me I could not stay in a house that I pay for because I smelled like smoke. You turned me out into the rain. Dad, we were stressed. Naomi pleaded, her voice taking on a whining, childlike quality that disgusted me. Logan has this huge pitch today. We just needed space. You cannot punish us like this. It is not punishment, Naomi. It is a boundary, I said, picking up my lockbox. I have spent my life building wealth so my family would never know want. But I will not fund disrespect. The money is gone. You will have to figure out how to pay for your lifestyle on your own. Logan let out a harsh, barking laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. You old fool! You think you are teaching us a lesson? You think we need your charity? He stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward my chest. You are ruining Naomi's future, your own daughter's future, because you got your feelings hurt. You are ruining your own future, Logan, I countered smoothly. He scoffed a sneer, twisting his features. Keep your pathetic money, Malcolm. I do not need it. Tonight, I am closing a $2 million seed round with a major angel investor. Once that money hits the account, we will buy that house outright, and you will never see a dime of the equity. We are done with you. Naomi looked torn, caught between her husband's bravado and the terrifying reality of a frozen bank account. Come on, Logan, she said softly, tugging at his sleeve. Let us go. We will figure this out. They stormed out of the motel room, slamming the door behind them, leaving me alone in the quiet. I walked over to the window and watched them get into an Uber, the loss of the Porsche forcing them to travel like commoners. I watched the car pull away and a slow, dark smirk spread across my face. Logan was right about one thing. He was expecting a $2 million investment tonight. What he did not know, what his towering arrogance prevented him from investigating, was the identity of that anonymous angel investor. The investor who was scheduled to arrive at his mansion in a few hours, the investor who held the fate of his fake company in his hands, was me. The evening air was crisp and biting as I stepped out of a standard rideshare sedan and onto the long, sweeping driveway of the Buckhead mansion. Caterers in crisp white shirts weaved expertly through a fleet of parked luxury vehicles, balancing silver trays of champagne and caviar. Logan had pulled out all the stops for his so-called $2 million seed funding pitch. I walked up the illuminated stone pathway wearing a $90 polyester suit I had picked up from a discount department store earlier that afternoon. Everything else I owned had burned to ash the night before. The suit was stiff, poorly tailored, and smelled faintly of warehouse cardboard and cheap fabric. It was the perfect armor for tonight. I bypassed the valet, ignoring the puzzled stares of the hired staff, and pushed through the heavy front doors. The massive foyer was buzzing with the low-cultured hum of Atlanta elite networking. Jazz music floated from the grand living room, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses. I scanned the opulent room, taking in the massive floral arrangements and the hired string quartet. This was all a grand theater production, and I was the unseen director deciding it was finally time to drop the curtain. It took less than 2 minutes for Logan to spot me. He was standing near the towering marble fireplace, holding court with a group of men in bespoke Italian suits, gesturing enthusiastically as he spouted his usual meaningless tech jargon about disruptive algorithms and scalable paradigms. The moment his eyes locked onto my discount gray suit, the color drained completely from his face. He excused himself abruptly, his forced smile faltering, and marched across the room with the stiff, aggressive stride of a man trying to suppress absolute panic. Naomi followed close behind him, looking absolutely horrified. She wore an emerald green evening gown, clutching a champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were white. "Malcolm, what do you think you are doing?" Logan hissed, grabbing my elbow and attempting to steer me toward the hallway away from the prying eyes of his wealthy guests. "You cannot be here. Look at yourself. You look like a door-to-door salesman." I planted my feet, refusing to be moved. I possessed the heavy, immovable stance of a man who spent his 20s hauling freight, a physical weight Logan's soft, manicured hands could not budge. "Let go of my arm, Logan," I said evenly, pitching my voice just loud enough to make him flinch. "I came to see the pitch. I want to see what a $2 million company looks like in person." "Dad, please," Naomi pleaded, her voice a desperate, urgent whisper. "You are embarrassing us. The investor is going to be here any minute. If he sees you crashing the party looking like this, he will think we are a joke. Our accounts are already frozen. We need this deal to survive." "Then you better hope your husband's business model is stronger than his credit limit," I replied, brushing invisible dust off my cheap lapel. Logan stepped in front of me, trying to physically block me from the view of the living room. "I am calling security," he growled, his face inches from mine, a vein throbbing in his forehead. "You are trespassing. You do not own this house, Malcolm. I will have you thrown out on the street where you belong." I simply smiled, a cold, empty expression that made his bravado falter slightly. "Go ahead and call them," I challenged him softly. "Let us make a huge scene right as your savior walks through the door." Before Logan could reach into his pocket for his phone, a sudden hush fell over the room. The heavy oak front doors opened, and the string quartet seamlessly transitioned to a softer, more respectful melody. The man of the hour had arrived. Richard Sterling walked into the foyer, projecting the exact aura of a billionaire angel investor. He wore a flawless, custom-tailored navy suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase, his expression entirely unreadable and utterly intimidating. Logan immediately abandoned me, his anger instantly replaced by an obsequious, hungry smile. He smoothed his tie, stood up straight, and rushed forward to greet the man holding his financial salvation. "Mr. Sterling, welcome." Logan beamed, extending a hand with practiced enthusiasm. "We are absolutely thrilled to have you here tonight. Please let me get you a drink before we begin the presentation." Sterling did not take the offered hand. He stood motionless in the center of the foyer. The guests naturally parted, forming a quiet, expectant circle around the scene. What Logan did not know was that Richard Sterling was not an independent venture capitalist. Sterling was the senior asset liquidator for Right Supply Chain Solutions. 10 years ago, I had hired him specifically to dismantle failing companies we acquired. Sterling answered only to me, and earlier that day I had given him a very specific set of instructions. Sterling looked at Logan with clinical detachment, then his cold eyes flicked over to me, standing quietly in my cheap suit. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. The signal was given. The trap was sprung. "There will be no presentation tonight." "Logan?" Sterling announced, his sharp voice carrying effortlessly across the sudden breathless silence of the room. The wealthy guests exchanged confused murmurs. Logan's practiced smile froze, turning into a painful, awkward grimace. "I am sorry, I do not understand." Logan stammered, a nervous, high-pitched laugh escaping his throat. "Is there a problem with the schedule? We can adjust the timeline." "There is a massive problem with your financials," Sterling replied, opening his leather briefcase and pulling out a thick red folder. "My firm conducted a final deep dive forensic audit this afternoon. Your user acquisition metrics are entirely fabricated. Your projected revenue streams are based on non-existent vendor contracts that you forged. Furthermore, you have listed personal expenses including luxury car leases, private country club memberships, and extravagant vacations as operational corporate overhead. The silence in the room became thick and suffocating. Naomi dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the polished marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot, but no one looked away from Logan. "This is a misunderstanding," Logan pleaded, sweat beading heavily on his forehead as he looked around at his whispering peers. "I can explain the accounting structure. It is a standard growth phase strategy." "It is wire fraud," Sterling corrected him loudly, ensuring every wealthy friend and potential business partner in the room heard the accusation clearly. "You are running a shell game, Logan. My firm is pulling the $2 million term sheet effectively immediately. We are also forwarding our complete audit findings to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Do not ever contact my office again." Sterling handed the red folder to a trembling Logan, turned on his heel, and walked out the front door. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. The elite guests began whispering furiously, setting their expensive drinks down and shuffling quickly toward the exits, eager to distance themselves from a sinking ship. Logan stood paralyzed, staring at the red folder in his hands as his entire fake empire collapsed into dust. Naomi spun around to face me, her eyes blazing with irrational, unhinged fury. In her twisted, entitled reality, my mere presence had cursed the evening. She lunged forward, raising her hand, and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp, stinging impact radiated across my cheek, but I did not flinch or step back. "This is your fault," Naomi screamed, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria as the last of her so-called friends hurried out the door, abandoning her. "You brought your pathetic, miserable energy in here and ruined everything. I hate you." I touched my stinging cheek, looking at my daughter with absolute chilling calm. I reached into the pocket of my cheap polyester suit, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had memorized decades ago. Vincent picked up on the very first ring. "Vincent!" I said, my cold eyes locked on Naomi's terrified, tear-streaked face. "The deal is dead. Initiate the asset seizure immediately." The morning sun reflected off the pristine crystal glasses at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Naomi sat on the terrace wearing a tailored white blazer and a forced smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She was having brunch with three of her wealthiest socialite friends, desperately pretending the catastrophic events of the previous night had never happened. She swirled her mimosa, laughing entirely too loudly at a joke she barely heard. Her phone lay face down on the table, a silent tomb of blocked numbers and overdrawn account alerts. Logan had spent the entire morning screaming at bank representatives on the phone, but Naomi chose denial. She ordered the imported truffle omelet, acting as though her financial foundation was not actively crumbling beneath her designer heels. She needed her friends to see her as the untouchable wife of a tech genius. She needed the illusion to hold just a little longer. That fragile illusion shattered exactly at noon. A man in a cheap brown suit and rubber-soled shoes walked onto the exclusive private terrace. He completely ignored the indignant protests of the maitre d' and marched directly toward Naomi's table. The chatter among the elite guests died down as the stranger stopped right next to Naomi. He carried a battered leather satchel that looked completely alien in this environment of wealth and privilege. "Are you Naomi Pierce?" he asked in a loud, flat voice that carried effortlessly across the quiet patio. Naomi blinked, her forced smile freezing on her face as her friends stopped talking and stared. "Yes, who is asking?" she demanded, pulling her shoulders back to project authority. The man did not introduce himself. He simply reached into his worn leather satchel, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and slapped them down right on top of her expensive linen napkin, knocking over her crystal water glass. "You have been served," he announced clearly, ensuring every wealthy woman at the table heard him perfectly. "You and your husband have exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises. Have a nice day." He turned and walked away, leaving a suffocating heavy silence in his wake. Naomi stared at the bold black letters printed across the top page. Notice to vacate. 3-day eviction notice. One of her friends, a woman whose husband ran a hedge fund, leaned in, her eyes wide with morbid, predatory curiosity. "Naomi, what is that? Is that an eviction notice for the Buckhead estate?" Naomi snatched the papers off the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson as she felt the judgmental stares of her peers burning into her skin. "This is a mistake," she stammered, pushing her chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed loudly onto the stone patio. "It is just a ridiculous administrative error from Logan's accounting team. The property management company crossed some wires." "Excuse me." She grabbed her designer purse and practically ran off the terrace, leaving her untouched truffle omelet and her totally destroyed social reputation behind. The venomous whispers of her friends started before she even reached the parking lot. Naomi did not go back to the mansion. She ordered a rideshare and directed the driver straight to the address listed at the bottom of the eviction notice. It belonged to Vanguard Holdings, LLC, a corporate law firm located in a high-rise building in downtown Atlanta. She stormed past the security desk and marched directly into the sleek minimalist reception area, demanding to see whoever was in charge of the property division immediately. A senior partner, a tall man with silver hair and a sharp-tailored suit, emerged from a corner glass office. He introduced himself as Arthur Vance, the managing director of the firm. Naomi slammed the eviction notice onto his pristine glass desk. "There has been a massive mistake," she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "You are trying to evict us from our own home. My husband's venture capital firm holds the deed. You have absolutely no legal right to issue this document." Vance did not flinch or raise his voice. He calmly adjusted his glasses, picked up a heavy master file from his desk, and slid it across the glass toward her. "Mrs. Pierce, your husband does not own the property. He has never owned the property. The mansion is owned entirely by Vanguard Holdings, LLC. For the past 2 years, a private trust has been paying the $50,000 monthly mortgage on your behalf. Yesterday morning, that trust permanently revoked all funding. You are currently in breach of contract and trespassing on corporate property." Naomi stared at him, her breath catching painfully in her throat. "What trust?" she whispered, her confidence evaporating. "Who owns Vanguard Holdings?" Vance opened the folder and pointed a perfectly manicured finger to the primary signature on the deed of trust. "Read it yourself," he said coldly. Naomi looked down at the paper. Staring back at her in bold black ink was the unmistakable, aggressive signature of the CEO, Malcolm Wright. The polished marble floor of the law office seemed to drop out from beneath her feet. Malcolm Wright, her father. The man she had turned away in the freezing rain. The man she had slapped across the face just hours ago in front of Atlanta's elite. Her mind raced frantically, piecing together the devastating puzzle she had been too blind to see. The luxury mansion, the unlimited black cards, the pristine lifestyle she had flaunted in front of her friends, none of it came from Logan. Logan was a complete fraud, playing a role funded by a ghost. Every single dime had been quietly provided by the father she treated like a daily embarrassment. He had not just cut off a monthly allowance, he had pulled the plug on her entire existence. She realized with a sickening wave of nausea that she owned absolutely nothing in this world. The designer clothes, the cars, the social status, it was all rented on her father's dime. She was legally, financially, and socially broke. Her net worth was a definitive zero. The realization hit her with the crushing force of a freight train, destroying the last fragile remnants of her arrogant pride. She stumbled backward out of the law office, the eviction notice clutched in her trembling hands, completely decimated by the silent, invisible power her father had wielded all along. Naomi burst through the front doors of the mansion and found Logan frantically packing a suitcase in the living room. She threw the eviction papers at his chest. "It was my father," she screamed, tears of rage and fear streaming down her face. "He owns this house, Logan. He owns the company. He funded your entire fake life, and now he's throwing us out on the street." Logan stared at the signature on the papers, his eyes widening in horror. The reality of his complete financial ruin washed over him. But instead of accepting defeat, a dark, twisted look of desperation settled over his features. He dropped the suitcase and grabbed Naomi by the shoulders, his grip bruising and tight. "Listen to me, Naomi," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your father is a 69-year-old man who just lost his home in a fire. He is wandering around in cheap suits, acting erratically and canceling crucial financial obligations. He is clearly suffering from extreme trauma and dementia. We are not leaving this house. We are going to court tomorrow. We will declare him mentally incompetent and take full conservatorship of his entire estate." The walls of my cheap motel room were paper thin, offering absolutely no resistance to the heavy, authoritative pounding on the door that shattered the afternoon quiet. I had anticipated a counterattack from Logan, but the sheer reckless desperation of his timing was almost impressive. I set my lukewarm coffee cup down on the stained nightstand, walked to the door, and pulled it open. Logan stood in the narrow, dimly lit exterior hallway, flanked by 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers. Beside him hovered a sweaty, nervous-looking man clutching a worn leather briefcase, trying very hard to project an air of clinical authority. Logan's face was a mask of exaggerated, sickeningly false concern. Naomi was tucked safely behind his shoulder, her eyes red-rimmed and darting around the dingy corridor, looking utterly lost. I did not flinch or react. Decades of military training and ruthless corporate warfare had hardwired my nervous system to process ambushes with icy detachment. I looked at the police officers, acknowledging their presence with a slow nod, then shifted my gaze to the nervous man with the briefcase. The play was incredibly obvious. Logan had brought the power of the state to my doorstep. "Officers, that is him!" Logan said, his voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed tremor of grief and exhaustion. "My father-in-law. He lost his home in a massive fire 2 nights ago, and the trauma has completely fractured his mind. He is wandering around town in cheap clothes, sleeping in this squalor and exhibiting highly destructive, irrational financial behavior. We are terrified he is an immediate danger to himself." One of the officers, a burly man with a stern, tired expression, stepped forward, resting a hand casually near his utility belt. "Mr. Wright, we received an emergency call from your family expressing deep concern for your mental well-being. This gentleman is Dr. Aris, a licensed state psychiatrist. He is here to conduct a preliminary psychological evaluation." The sweaty man stepped forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Mr. Wright, considering the severe psychological shock of losing your primary residence and your subsequent erratic isolation, I am authorized to recommend an immediate 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold for your own protection. We have an ambulance waiting downstairs to transport you to a secure medical facility where we can stabilize your condition." It was a legally sanctioned kidnapping. Logan was attempting to weaponize the mental health system to lock me in a psych ward, temporarily stripping me of my legal rights so he could rush to a judge and petition for emergency conservatorship. Once he had that power of attorney, he would drain my corporate accounts, reinstate his lavish lifestyle, and leave me rotting in a sterile facility, heavily medicated and permanently silenced. It was a vile, desperate strategy, and it relied entirely on one thing happening. It relied on me losing my temper. If I shouted, if I cursed at Logan, if I resisted the officers, if I showed even a fraction of the rage burning inside my chest, I would validate their fabricated narrative of a crazy, aggressive old man. Instead, I leaned comfortably against the doorframe, my posture relaxed, my breathing slow and measured. I looked Dr. Aris up and down, noting his scuffed cheap shoes and the slight anxious tremor in his hands. He was a professional for hire, bought with whatever cash Logan had managed to scrape together from his personal accounts before the eviction notice landed. "I am perfectly fine, gentlemen," I said, my voice resonating with deep, commanding clarity. "My house burned down, so I rented a temporary room while my insurance processes the property claim. My financial decisions are my own, made with complete cognitive awareness. You are being manipulated by a desperate man who is terrified because I just cut off his access to my bank accounts." Logan shook his head dramatically, looking at the officers with pleading, desperate eyes. "You see, paranoia, delusions of persecution. He thinks everyone is after his money. Please, officers, you have to take him in before he hurts himself or someone else." Before the officer could reach for the heavy radio on his shoulder to call the waiting medics, the connecting door to the adjoining motel room swung open with a sharp click. Vincent Russo, my lead corporate attorney, stepped out into the hallway. Vincent wore a flawless charcoal pinstripe suit that cost more than Logan's entire wardrobe combined. He carried a sleek silver briefcase and radiated the kind of ruthless, razor-sharp legal authority that makes police officers instantly second-guess their jurisdiction. "Nobody is taking my client anywhere," Vincent announced, his voice cutting through the humid hallway air like a surgical scalpel. He walked forward and handed a thick, heavily notarized dossier directly to the lead officer. "My name is Vincent Russo, senior partner at Vanguard Holdings Legal Division. What you are holding is a comprehensive independent psychiatric and cognitive evaluation of Mr. Malcolm Wright. It was conducted yesterday afternoon by the chief of neurology at Emory University Hospital. My client passed with perfect cognitive function. He is sharper, saner, and healthier than anyone standing in this hallway." Vincent let that reality sink into the officer's mind before turning his predatory gaze onto the sweating psychiatrist. "Dr. Aris, is it? I ran a comprehensive background check on your private practice an hour ago. You currently have 2 pending malpractice suits and a documented history of issuing fraudulent psychiatric evaluations for cash under the table. If you do not turn around and walk away from my client this very second, I will personally file a lawsuit that will strip you of your medical license, drain your personal assets, and bury you in federal court for conspiring to commit medical fraud and elder abuse." Vincent took a slow, deliberate step closer to the trembling doctor, lowering his voice to a lethal quiet register. "I will make absolutely sure you never practice medicine in this state or any other state again. Do you understand me clearly?" Dr. Aris turned the color of old dry parchment. He looked at Logan, then back at Vincent, his mind rapidly calculating the terrifying legal weight bearing down on him. Without saying a single word to defend himself or his diagnosis, the doctor clutched his briefcase tightly to his chest, spun on his heel, and fast walked down the motel corridor, abandoning the operation entirely to save his own skin. The police officers exchanged a long, incredibly tired look. They recognized a toxic, high-stakes civil dispute when they saw one. The lead officer handed the medical dossier back to Vincent with a respectful nod and then glared fiercely at Logan. "Sir, if you ever weaponize emergency police services for a personal financial dispute again, I will personally arrest you for filing a false police report and wasting city resources. Have a good day, Mr. Wright." The officers turned and marched heavily down the hallway, leaving Logan completely exposed and outmaneuvered. His grand master plan, his silver bullet to regain control of my fortune and silence me forever, had evaporated in less than 3 minutes. He stood there in the dingy hallway, his jaw working silently, stripped of his police escort and his bribed doctor, facing a father-in-law he had severely and chronically underestimated. I ignored Logan entirely. He was a defeated, scrambling parasite, no longer worthy of my direct attention. Instead, I shifted my focus to my daughter. Naomi was trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around her own waist as she stared blankly at the stained carpet. The crushing reality of her husband's depravity and his willingness to lock her own father in a psychiatric ward was finally beginning to crack her arrogant, entitled shell. I stepped back into my motel room, walked over to the desk, picked up a thick, heavy manila folder, and walked back to the doorway. I held it out to her, forcing her to look up at me. "You think your husband is a tech genius?" "Naomi," I asked, my voice dropping the cold corporate tone and replacing it with the stern, undeniable authority of a father delivering a harsh truth. "You think he needed my $50,000 a month to fund his visionary startup and pay his developers? Take this. Open it. Look at what your husband really does with his startup money." Naomi stumbled out of the dingy motel corridor and into the blinding afternoon sun, clutching the thick manila folder against her chest like a shield. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps as she reached the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. She leaned against the rusted side of an ice machine, her legs trembling so violently she could barely stand. The arrogant, untouchable socialite from Buckhead was gone, replaced by a terrified woman whose reality was fracturing by the second. Her manicured fingers fumbled with the metal clasp of the folder. She did not want to open it. Every instinct screamed at her to throw it in the nearest dumpster and run back to the illusion of her perfect life. But the sheer weight of my challenge, the undeniable authority in my voice, forced her hands to move. She flipped the cover open and her entire world finally irreversibly shattered. The first item in the stack was an 8x10 glossy photograph. It showed Logan, her brilliant tech founder husband, standing outside a modest townhouse in a working-class neighborhood across the city. He was not wearing his tailored Armani suits. He was in cheap sweatpants, lifting a toddler into the air while a blonde woman kissed his cheek. The date stamp on the bottom right corner of the photo was from last Tuesday, the exact day Logan had claimed he was flying to Silicon Valley for an emergency board meeting. Naomi flipped wildly to the next photo. It was the same woman sitting on Logan's lap on a cheap patio sofa, staring adoringly at the diamond tennis bracelet around her wrist. Naomi recognized that bracelet instantly. It was the exact piece missing from her own jewelry box, the one Logan swore the housekeepers must have stolen months ago. Beneath the photos lay a thick stack of financial ledgers, bank statements, and intercepted text messages. Logan did not have a tech startup. There were no developers, no proprietary algorithms, no scalable paradigms. The corporate entity he claimed to run was nothing more than an empty shell corporation, a fictitious entity used strictly to launder my $50,000 monthly deposits. The ledgers meticulously detailed where my hard-earned money had actually gone. $15,000 a month went to maintaining the secret family across town, paying for their rent, groceries, and the blonde woman's luxury car lease. The rest of the money was funneled directly into a massive, spiraling black hole of gambling debts. Logan was severely addicted to high-stakes sports betting. The intercepted messages printed in the folder were from violent underground bookies demanding immediate payment. The language in the texts was brutal and direct. The final document in the folder was a chilling balance sheet indicating Logan was currently $300,000 in the red to an illegal syndicate that did not send polite collection letters. They had promised to start breaking bones if he did not deliver a massive lump sum by the end of the week. Naomi stared at the numbers, the horrifying truth settling into her bones like ice. Logan's frantic desperation to lock me in a psychiatric ward had absolutely nothing to do with maintaining their luxury lifestyle. He needed total control of my assets to save his own life from the violent men he owed. He was going to sell me out, declare me insane, and steal my entire fortune just to buy his own survival from the mob. From the window of my motel room, I watched my daughter slide down the side of the ice machine until she hit the dirty asphalt, weeping uncontrollably over the scattered papers. I did not feel a shred of pity. Pity is a useless emotion that only breeds weakness, and I refuse to let weakness dictate my actions. 6 months ago, my accountants noticed strange, rapid discrepancies in the expense reports tied to her household. A man does not build a logistics empire by ignoring the margins. I hired an elite private intelligence firm composed of former federal agents to quietly audit my son-in-law. It took them less than 72 hours to unearth the secret family and the massive gambling syndicate. I had the evidence in my hands half a year ago. I could have exposed him immediately. I could have marched into their mansion, slammed the evidence on the marble kitchen island, and dragged my daughter away from him to safety. But I remembered the cold, entitled way Naomi had spoken to the waitstaff at my late wife's memorial. I remembered how quickly she adapted to looking down on the working class, completely forgetting the grueling sacrifices that built her privilege. If I saved her, then she would have played the victim. She would have found another parasite to attach herself to, convinced that Daddy would always bail her out. I needed to see exactly who she was when the pressure was applied. I needed to know if the daughter Camille and I raised had any loyalty left. Last night, when she stood on that porch and chose her own comfort over her father who had just lost everything in a fire, she gave me my final answer. She failed the test completely. The harsh exposure of this betrayal was not just punishment. It was a mandatory, agonizing education she desperately needed to survive the real world. Logan stumbled out of the motel lobby, aggressively looking over his shoulder to ensure the police and his bribed doctor were truly gone. He spotted Naomi sitting on the asphalt, surrounded by the confidential papers, and marched toward her, his face twisted in an ugly, desperate snarl. "Get up, Naomi," he snapped, grabbing her arm with a rough, bruising grip that left no room for argument. "We are leaving right now. We need to find another judge to sign the conservatorship papers before your father contacts his corporate lawyers again." Naomi ripped her arm away, her sorrow instantly vaporizing into blinding, explosive rage. She grabbed the photograph of Logan and the blonde woman and shoved it violently into his chest. "Who is she, Logan?" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury and betrayal. "You stole my jewelry to give to her. You owe $300,000 to underground bookies. You have no company. You have nothing." Logan looked down at the photograph, his eyes widening in pure panic as his entire carefully constructed web of lies detonated right in his face. The polished, sophisticated tech founder vanished entirely, leaving behind only a cornered, vicious rat. He lunged forward, grabbing Naomi by the throat and slamming her hard against the metal casing of the ice machine. "Shut your mouth," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you are so innocent. You spent $10,000 a month on designer clothes and spa treatments while I was drowning trying to keep up the appearance you demanded. You bled me dry with your endless vanity." Naomi choked, clawing desperately at the thick fingers digging into her throat. Logan leaned in closer, his eyes dead and merciless. "Listen to me very carefully, you spoiled brat," he whispered, tightening his grip. "I used your name and your social security number to open the offshore accounts where the embezzled money was laundered. My signature is nowhere on the fraudulent wire transfers. Yours is everywhere. You are legally the primary suspect for federal wire fraud. If I go down, you are going to federal prison right next to me. The only way you survive this is if you go back upstairs, get on your knees, and manipulate that crazy old man into signing over his estate. Get me his money, Naomi, or I will personally hand the FBI the evidence to lock you away for 10 years. I left that squalid motel an hour after Logan fled the parking lot. The cheap room had served its specific purpose. It was a stage set to measure my daughter's loyalty, and she failed spectacularly. My permanent residence was a high-security penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline purchased through a blind trust months ago. The transition was seamless, handled quietly by Vincent's team. I was standing in my glass-walled living room pouring a glass of premium bourbon when the private elevator chimed unexpectedly. Logan stepped out, breathing heavily. Desperation makes weak men incredibly reckless. He had bribed a delivery driver to tailgate his way up the service elevator, bypassing the ground-floor concierge entirely. He stood on my imported hardwood floors, gripping a heavy steel tire iron he must have pulled from his trunk. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes wild and bloodshot. The underground bookies had given him a strict deadline, and he had officially run out of time. He thought he could corner an old man alone in a high tower and physically beat him into signing a multi-million-dollar wire transfer to save his own skin. He raised the tire iron, pointing it directly at my chest, his shoulders heaving with adrenaline. "Write the check!" Logan spat, gripping the steel bar so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "Write the check for $300,000 right now, or I swear to God I will cave your skull in. I will tell the police you attacked me and I acted in self-defense. I have the medical records proving you are mentally unstable. Nobody will believe a crazy old man over a respected tech founder. Just sign the damn transfer." I took a slow sip of my bourbon, relishing the smooth burn in my throat before setting the crystal glass gently on the marble island. I did not reach for my phone. I did not hit the panic button hidden under the counter. I looked at the fragile, shaking man standing in my living room, and I felt an absolute freezing calm wash over my entire nervous system. I spent 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, completing 2 combat tours before I ever touched a logistics contract or sat in a boardroom. You do not survive that kind of brutal warfare without learning exactly how to dismantle a threat efficiently and permanently. I mapped Logan's physical stance in a fraction of a second. His weight was entirely shifted onto his back foot, his shoulders were stiff and rigid, and his grip on the heavy weapon was incredibly amateurish, leaving his center of gravity completely exposed. I took one deliberate step forward, offering myself as a clear target. Logan swung the tire iron in a wide, clumsy arc, aiming straight for my temple. He telegraphed the strike a full second before he actually moved. I sidestepped the heavy steel bar, letting its chaotic momentum pull him completely off balance. Before he could recover or pull his arm back, I closed the distance. I struck his throat with a rigid knife-hand strike, collapsing his windpipe just enough to cut off his oxygen and induce blind panic. As he choked and dropped the weapon, I grabbed his right wrist, pivoted my hips, and applied a brutal twisting joint lock. The loud, sickening pop of his shoulder dislocating echoed sharply through the silent penthouse. Logan hit the hardwood floor face first, screaming in absolute agony as I dropped my full weight, driving my knee directly into the center of his spine, trapping him completely. The entire altercation, from his violent threat to his total submission, lasted exactly 3 seconds. I pinned him flat against the floor, applying just enough downward pressure with my knee to keep him immobilized and gasping for air. His arrogant face was smashed against the polished wood tears of sudden blinding pain streaming from his eyes. I reached into my tailored slacks, pulled out my secure smartphone, and hit the record button. My voice remained as steady and emotionless as a machine. "I am recording this audio, Logan," I said, leaning down so my voice was right next to his ear. "I am going to ask you exactly 2 questions. If you lie to me or if you hesitate, I will dislocate your other shoulder. If you tell the truth, you get to walk out of here breathing. Nod if you understand." Logan sobbed violently, spitting blood onto the floor, and nodded his head as best he could under my crushing weight. "Did you use your fake tech startup to embezzle $50,000 a month from my trust fund to pay illegal gambling debts and support a secret second family?" I demanded, pressing my knee slightly harder against his vertebrae. "Yes." Logan choked out his voice, a pathetic, raspy wheeze. "Yes, I did it. I took the money. And did you forge Naomi's signature on offshore bank accounts to launder that stolen money, attempting to frame my daughter for federal wire fraud in order to protect yourself?" I asked, tightening my grip on his broken arm. "Yes, I forged her signature," he cried out, thrashing weakly against the floor. "I set her up. I did it. Please stop. Please let me go." I stopped the recording and saved the file directly to my secure encrypted cloud server. The absolute, unassailable proof of his guilt was officially secured. I released his arm and stepped back, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. Logan rolled over, clutching his dislocated shoulder, whimpering like a wounded animal. He looked up at me, the facade of the brilliant, untouchable tech founder completely annihilated. "Look at yourself," I commanded. staring down at him with absolute disgust. You walked into my home thinking you could intimidate me because my hair is gray and because I allowed you to live off my wealth for 2 years. You mistook my silent generosity for weakness. You thought wearing a $1,000 suit and memorizing a few corporate buzzwords made you a man of power. Real power is not leased, Logan. Real power is not bought with stolen money or sustained by desperate lies. Real power is standing in a room knowing you can strip a man of everything he values without ever raising your voice. You are nothing but a fragile parasitic coward who preys on women and hides behind forged documents. You thought you could throw me in a psychiatric ward to cover your own pathetic failures. You tried to build a kingdom on top of a sleeping giant, and now the giant has woken up. The underground bookies you owe do not care about your startup pitch or your country club membership. They only care about their $300,000, and I am going to make absolutely certain they know exactly where you are. I walked over to the Marble Island and picked up my glass of bourbon. I took a slow, deliberate sip, relishing the absolute silence in the room before delivering my final verdict. You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever you can carry and cross state lines, I told him, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. If I see your face in Atlanta after tomorrow morning, I will personally hand this recorded confession over to the FBI field office downtown. You will rot in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud while your mob bookies tear apart your secret family looking for their money. Get out of my penthouse before I throw you off the balcony. Logan scrambled to his feet, clutching his ruined arm, and ran toward the service elevator, leaving a trail of blood on my floor. The parasite was gone, but my daughter still needed her final lesson. The 72-hour eviction window expired precisely at noon on Thursday. I monitored the entire sequence through the encrypted security feed on my tablet, sitting comfortably in my penthouse. 2 Fulton County Sheriff cruisers pulled past the heavy wrought iron gates of the Buckhead mansion. Their tires crunched over the pristine gravel parking exactly where Logan leased Porsche used to sit. 4 deputies stepped out of the vehicles wearing tactical vests and carrying heavy clipboards. This was not a polite visit. This was a court-mandated physical removal. Vanguard Holdings LLC had officially reclaimed its property. Inside the mansion, Naomi was still clinging to the desperate delusion that Logan had somehow fixed the situation. She believed his lie about securing a new judge to declare me incompetent. She did not know her husband had spent the previous evening weeping on my floor with a dislocated shoulder. The heavy pounding on the custom mahogany front door echoed through the empty, cavernous halls. Naomi opened the door wearing a silk robe, her face pale and exhausted. The lead deputy did not smile or offer pleasantries. He handed her a stamped court order and told her she had exactly 15 minutes to gather her personal belongings and vacate the premises or face immediate arrest for criminal trespassing. Panic instantly hijacked Naomi's nervous system. She slammed the door in the deputies' faces and ran up the grand sweeping staircase screaming Logan's name. She burst into the master suite expecting to find her brilliant tech founder husband furiously dialing his high-powered attorneys to stop the officers. Instead, she found absolute destruction. The massive walk-in closet had been entirely ransacked. Every single tailored suit, every designer shoe, and every piece of expensive luggage was gone. The heavy steel wall safe, hidden behind a framed painting, was hanging wide open, its digital keypad smashed with a heavy object. Naomi fell to her knees, her hands trembling violently as she reached inside the empty metal box. The $50,000 in emergency cash they kept hidden was gone. Her diamond tennis bracelets, her platinum engagement ring, and the vintage pearl necklace she inherited from her grandmother were all missing. Logan had not gone to court to fight the eviction. He had used the 24-hour head start I gave him to completely clean out his own wife. He packed a bag in the dead of night, robbed her blind, and fled across state lines like the pathetic, cowardly parasite he truly was. He left her holding the bag for his forged wire transfers and his $300,000 underground gambling debt. The deputies pounded on the front door again, shouting a final warning that they were preparing to breach the entrance. Naomi scrambled off the floor, her breath coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. She grabbed 2 random canvas duffel bags from the floor and began throwing whatever she could reach inside. Sweaters, a few pairs of jeans, her basic makeup bag. She left behind the bulky designer gowns and the expensive high heels, realizing with sudden crushing clarity that those items were completely useless in the real world. She tried to call Logan's phone, but the automated voice message confirmed the number had been permanently disconnected. He had erased himself from her life completely. A deputy unlocked the front door with the master key provided by my legal team and stepped into the foyer. "Time is up, Mrs. Pierce," the officer announced, his hand resting on his radio. "Move toward the exit immediately." Naomi dragged the two heavy duffel bags down the marble stairs, her silk robe clinging to her sweating, shaking body. She did not look back at the grand chandelier or the expansive living room where she used to host lavish parties. She walked out the front door, and the deputies locked the heavy deadbolt behind her, sealing off her false kingdom forever. Naomi stood alone on the pristine curb of the exclusive Buckhead neighborhood. Two overstuffed canvas duffel bags sat on the wet asphalt beside her. The sky above was a heavy, threatening gray, promising a brutal afternoon downpour. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock the screen. She opened her contacts and dialed Sarah, the wife of a prominent hedge fund manager who had been drinking mimosas with her just days ago. The call went straight to voicemail. She dialed Chloe, another socialite who had practically lived at the mansion during summer pool parties. Chloe answered, but her tone was ice cold. "Look, Naomi, I heard about the eviction and the federal wire fraud rumors surrounding Logan. My husband says we absolutely cannot be associated with that kind of legal liability. Do not call this number again." The line went dead. Naomi dialed 4 more numbers. 4 more friends who had happily drank my $50,000 monthly allowance in the form of vintage champagne. Every single one of them rejected her. In the world of fake wealth, loyalty evaporates the exact second the credit card declines. She was utterly toxic, a social pariah standing on a sidewalk with nowhere to go. The first heavy drops of cold November rain began to fall, hitting the pavement with a sharp, stinging rhythm. Naomi shivered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as the water soaked through her thin silk robe and designer pajamas. She had no cash to hail a cab. Her bank accounts were frozen solid by my lawyers, and her credit score was completely annihilated by Logan fraudulent loans. For 32 years, she had operated under the arrogant assumption that she was special, that she deserved luxury simply by existing. Now, standing on the edge of a manicured lawn she did not own, looking at a gated community that had just chewed her up and spit her out, the brutal reality of having absolutely nothing hit her with devastating force. She was not a tech founder wife. She was a broke, unemployed woman standing in the rain with 2 bags of wrinkled clothes. She had no survival skills, no real-world experience, and no safety net. The protective bubble I had maintained for her entire life had popped, and the freezing reality of the outside world was rapidly inducing hypothermia. She sank down onto the wet curb, pulling her knees to her chest, completely broken by the absolute zero of her net worth. The rain quickly turned into a torrential downpour, washing away the last remnants of her arrogance. Naomi pulled her phone from her pocket, shielding the cracked screen from the water. She had exactly 2% battery remaining. She scrolled past the numbers of her fake friends, past the disconnected number of her fraudulent husband, and stopped at the one contact she had treated with absolute contempt. My name. She pressed the call button, bringing the phone to her ear with trembling blue lips. I was sitting in my penthouse watching the security feed when my phone rang. I picked it up but said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "Dad." Naomi sobbed, her voice cracking horribly over the line. "Dad, please. I have nothing. Logan left me. They locked me out. I am in the rain and I am so scared. Please let me come home." I did not answer her immediately. I let the silence hang over the phone line, listening to the heavy rain hitting the pavement and her pathetic, shivering gasps. Then I spoke 2 words. "Stay there." I ended the call and took the private elevator down to the secure underground parking garage of my penthouse building. I bypassed the everyday sedans and walked straight to the black Cadillac Escalade I kept hidden from my daughter and her parasitic husband. The heavy armored doors unlocked with a solid mechanical thud. I drove out into the brutal Atlanta storm, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the torrential downpour. It took me exactly 20 minutes to reach the gated community in Buckhead. I pulled up to the curb where Naomi was huddled next to her 2 soaked canvas duffel bags. She looked like a drowned rat, her expensive silk robe plastered to her shivering frame, her makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. She reached for the heavy door handle of the Escalade and practically fell into the passenger seat, bringing the smell of wet asphalt and total defeat into the pristine leather interior of my vehicle. Naomi immediately cranked the heated seats to maximum and began sobbing into her freezing hands. "Dad, they locked me out," she cried, her voice shaking violently. "Logan took everything, the jewelry, the cash, everything in the safe. He ran away and left me to deal with the sheriffs. I have absolutely nothing. I did not offer her a towel or a comforting word. I kept my eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road ahead, gripping the heated leather steering wheel with relaxed, steady hands. I pulled away from the manicured lawns of Buckhead and merged onto the highway heading south. Naomi assumed we were driving to some safe, warm haven. She stared out the passenger window, her tears slowly subsiding as the heavy luxury SUV navigated the flooded streets. We drove right past the gleaming glass tower where my high-security penthouse was located. I could see the illuminated top floors piercing the gray storm clouds, but I did not hit the turn signal. I kept driving straight, passing the financial district and pushing deeper into the neglected industrial sectors of the city. The landscape outside the tinted windows rapidly shifted from glass skyscrapers to boarded-up storefronts, flickering neon signs and chain-link fences. Naomi sat up straighter, her shivering replaced by a sudden creeping confusion. "Dad, where are we going?" she asked, wiping her running mascara with the back of her cold hand. "This is not the way to your townhouse." "My townhouse burned down, Naomi," I reminded her coldly. "And the estate you just got evicted from belongs to my corporate holding company." I pulled the Escalade off the main road and turned into the cracked, pothole-ridden parking lot of a decaying cinderblock motel. The neon sign above the office buzzed loudly, missing half its letters. The exterior corridors were dimly lit, and a group of rough-looking men stood smoking under a rusted awning, eyeing my expensive vehicle with predatory interest. I parked the car, put it in park, and unlocked the doors. The rain hammered against the roof of the Escalade, sounding like gravel. The contrast between the plush, quiet interior of my vehicle and the harsh, dangerous reality of the motel outside could not have been starker. "We are here," I announced, staring straight ahead. "Grab your bags." Naomi stared at the crumbling motel, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. I turned to face her, my expression carved from solid granite. "I am entirely serious, Naomi. I told you that your comfort was no longer my priority. You chose a fraud over your own father, and now you are facing the exact reality you constructed." I reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded perfectly in half. I dropped it onto the center console between us. "This is a legally binding waiver drafted by Vincent Russo. It officially, completely, and irreversibly removes you from my estate, my trusts, and any future inheritance. If you sign it right now, I will walk into that dirty office and prepay for exactly 30 days in a single room here. I will give you exactly 1 month of shelter. During those 30 days, you will go out into this city and secure a minimum wage job. You will learn how to sweep floors, wash dishes, or flip burgers. You will earn your own money to feed yourself. When the 30 days expire, you are entirely on your own. If you fail to pay the rent on day 31, the manager will throw you out just like the sheriffs did today. There are no extensions. There are no bailouts. There are no black cards. You either learn to survive in the dirt, or you drown in it. Sign the paper and take the room. Refuse and you can step out of my vehicle right now with your bags and test your luck on this street corner. You wanted to play the role of an independent elite socialite. Now you get to learn what true independence actually costs." Naomi stared at the paper as if it were coated in poison. The freezing, shivering victim vanished instantly, replaced by the toxic, entitled brat she had been for the last decade. Her pride, deeply bruised and backed into a corner, flared up into irrational, explosive anger. "You are out of your mind," she spat, her voice shrill and venomous. "You are a multimillionaire. I know you own Vanguard Holdings. I saw your signature. You have more money than God, and you want to leave your own flesh and blood in a crack motel. You are punishing me because my husband had financial problems. You are a cruel, sick old man. I will never sign away my rights to your money. That inheritance is mine by blood. You owe me a lifestyle. You promised Mom you would always take care of me. Do not ever invoke your mother's name to justify your parasitism." I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "Your mother begged me not to raise a spoiled, useless burden. I failed her. Now I am correcting that failure. If you will not sign the paper, then we have nothing left to discuss. Get out of my car." Naomi crossed her arms tightly, glaring at me with pure hatred. "I am not getting out," she demanded stubbornly. "You cannot do this to me. I will call a lawyer. I will sue you for emotional distress. I will drag your corporate name through the mud. You are going to take me to wherever you are living right now, and you are going to fix this." I did not argue with her delusional threats. I simply unbuckled my seatbelt, leaned across the heavy center console, and shoved her passenger door wide open, letting the freezing, violent rain whip into the luxurious cabin. I grabbed her 2 heavy canvas duffel bags from the back seat and threw them ruthlessly out onto the flooded, cracked asphalt. Then I grabbed her by the collar of her soaked silk robe and physically shoved her out of the vehicle. She hit the wet pavement hard, scraping her knees against the rough concrete. "Dad," she screamed, scrambling to her feet as the group of rough men under the motel awning turned to stare at her. I pulled the heavy armored door shut, locking it instantly. I shifted the Escalade into drive and hit the gas, leaving my only daughter standing completely alone, soaked to the bone in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Atlanta. 3 days after I left my daughter on that rain-slicked asphalt, her delusions of a quick corporate comeback completely evaporated. She had managed to pawn a damp silk robe and a designer handbag for enough cash to secure a miserable hostel bed and access to a public library computer. She spent 72 hours furiously emailing her resume to every boutique marketing firm and high-end public relations agency in Atlanta. She expected her prestigious university degree and her polished vocabulary to secure her an executive position immediately. The reality of the modern corporate world hit her like a sledgehammer. Every single background check flagged her social security number. Logan had not just borrowed money, he had rendered her financial identity absolutely radioactive. Her credit score was practically non-existent, cratered by hundreds of thousands of dollars in defaulted loans and outstanding liens tied to illegal offshore accounts. 2 different hiring managers rescinded their preliminary interview offers via automated emails citing severe discrepancies in her financial background checks. She was legally toxic. No reputable company would let her anywhere near their payroll or their clients. The prestigious corporate safety net she always assumed would catch her had been shredded by her own husband. By the 5th night, the meager cash from her pawned accessories ran out entirely. The hostel manager kicked her out into the humid, unforgiving Atlanta evening. Dragging her 2 increasingly heavy canvas duffel bags, she wandered aimlessly until her blistered feet brought her to a dimly lit public park on the edge of the industrial district. The manicured lawns of Buckhead, where private security aggressively chased away vagrants, felt like a hallucination from a different lifetime. Now she was the vagrant. She found a rigid wooden bench under the sprawling branches of an old oak tree and collapsed onto it. The temperature dropped steadily, biting through her thin, fashionable clothing. She wrapped her arms tightly around her chest, shivering violently as the sounds of the nocturnal city amplified her terror. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the erratic shouts of intoxicated strangers echoed down the block. Naomi tried to close her eyes, but the primal fear of exposure kept her agonizingly awake. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every snapping twig sounded like an approaching predator. She curled into a tight, miserable ball, pulling one of her canvas bags over her legs as a makeshift blanket. The sheer physical discomfort was agonizing, but the psychological destruction was far worse. She remembered the plush down pillows of her Buckhead mansion, the imported silk sheets, and the thermostat perfectly calibrated to 72 degrees. Now she had nothing to protect her from the damp wind except a thin layer of damp cotton. As the brutal hours of the night dragged on, her massive ego was systematically dismantled. The arrogance that allowed her to sneer at waitstaff, the entitlement that convinced her she deserved a $50,000 allowance, and the blind pride that made her reject my offer of shelter all crumbled into dust. She realized that without my money shielding her from the consequences of her own ignorance, she possessed zero survival skills. She could not negotiate. She could not leverage connections. She was entirely useless in a world that demanded tangible value. Hunger gnawed at her empty stomach, a sharp, relentless pain she had never experienced in her entire 32 years of existence. The $50 brunch plates she used to casually push away half-eaten now felt like a sinful waste. She looked down at her ruined manicured nails packed with dirt and grime and sobbed. Her tears were no longer manipulative weapons designed to extract pity or cash. They were genuine tears of absolute defeat. The socialite who demanded her comfort come first was now sleeping on public wood, entirely invisible to the world passing by. She was nothing. She had nothing. Less than 50 yards away, parked securely in the deep shadows of an abandoned storefront, I sat behind the tinted windows of my Escalade. My hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the pathetic, shivering figure curled up on the park bench. I had spent my entire adult life navigating cutthroat supply chain logistics, negotiating with union bosses, and crushing competitors who showed a fraction of the weakness Naomi was currently displaying. I knew that resilience could not be gifted. It had to be forged under immense pressure. A lesser father would have broken. A softer man would have thrown open the car door, rushed across the wet grass, and wrapped his daughter in a warm coat, offering endless apologies and immediate salvation. I did not move a single muscle. As I watched her weep, I thought of Camille. My late wife had spent her final days in a sterile hospital bed, her body ravaged by illness, but her mind razor-sharp. "Malcolm," she had whispered, holding my hand with astonishing grip strength, "do not let my absence turn you into a coward. Do not compensate for my death by giving Naomi the world on a silver platter. You built an empire from the mud. If you give her everything, she will value absolutely nothing. You cannot raise a parasite, Malcolm. It will destroy her." I had failed that promise for years, allowing my grief to mask her growing entitlement. I had funded her arrogance because paying her bills was easier than enforcing discipline. Now, observing her hit absolute rock bottom, I was finally keeping my word to Camille. This orchestrated suffering was not cruelty. It was a violent, mandatory excavation of her soul. I had to let the spoiled child completely die on that wooden bench, so a resilient, self-sufficient woman could be born from the ashes. The grueling night finally gave way to a cold, pale dawn. Naomi slowly uncurled her stiff, aching body from the wooden slats. Her muscles screamed in protest, and a deep, bone-chilling numbness had settled into her extremities. She sat up staring at the empty park with hollow, defeated eyes. The anger she had harbored toward me, her resentment toward her situation, and her desperate hope for a magical rescue had completely vanished. Survival had forcefully replaced entitlement. She slowly unzipped her duffel bag, pulled out a crumpled, relatively clean blouse, and changed right there in the freezing morning air. She did not reach for her phone to call her fake friends. She did not formulate a plan to sue me. She simply accepted her stark, devastating reality. She had to find food and she had to find work. Even if it meant scrubbing floors or hauling garbage, she was finally ready to submit to the brutal mechanics of the real world. Before she could even grasp the handles of her heavy bags, the screech of old brake pads shattered the quiet morning. Two battered, unmarked black sedans aggressively jumped the curb and parked directly on the grass, blocking her path to the street. The heavy doors swung open. Logan stepped out of the lead vehicle. He looked frantic, sweating profusely, his right arm still hanging awkwardly in a makeshift sling from our encounter at the penthouse. Flanking him were three massive, heavily tattooed men carrying baseball bats and radiating lethal intent. Logan marched straight toward the park bench, pointing a shaking finger at Naomi. "There she is," he shouted to the thugs, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Grab her bags. I need her signature on the title transfer for the Mercedes right now, or they are going to kill me, Naomi. Sign the damn paper." Two of the massive men advanced across the damp grass with predatory speed. Naomi tried to scramble backward over the wooden slats of the park bench, but her frozen, exhausted muscles betrayed her completely. One of the thugs grabbed her by the collar of her ruined blouse, yanking her to her feet with brutal force, while the other snatched her two canvas duffel bags and dumped their meager contents onto the muddy ground. Logan stood safely behind his hired muscle, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. He thrust a crumpled title transfer document and a cheap plastic pen directly into her face. "Sign the paper right now, Naomi," he shrieked, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his outstanding debts. "The syndicate is going to break my legs if I do not hand over the Mercedes by 8 in the morning. You owe me this. You spent my money. You lived in my house. Sign it or they are going to break your fingers one by one." Naomi sobbed, struggling weakly against the massive hand gripping her collar, but the thug merely tightened his hold, cutting off her air supply. From the deep shadows of the abandoned storefront 50 yards away, the heavy armored doors of my Cadillac Escalade swung open simultaneously. I stepped out onto the cracked pavement, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. I did not rush. I did not shout. I simply buttoned my tailored suit jacket and began walking deliberately across the open expanse of the park. I was not alone. From two unmarked black SUVs parked discreetly on the opposite side of the recreation area, 4 men in tactical tailored suits emerged. These were not street thugs carrying sporting equipment. They were elite private security contractors handpicked by Vincent Russo, all former military operators who handled high-threat corporate extractions. They moved with absolute lethal precision, fanning out to form a perfect tactical perimeter around Logan and his hired muscle. Vincent Russo walked calmly by my side, carrying a sleek silver briefcase, his polished leather shoes gliding over the damp grass. The three tattooed men holding my daughter instantly sensed the catastrophic shift in the tactical environment. The man gripping Naomi by the collar released her, letting her drop to the wet ground as he instinctively raised his baseball bat. But before he could even adjust his grip, a red laser dot appeared dead center on his chest, followed immediately by two more dots illuminating the foreheads of his companions. My security team had drawn their suppressed sidearms, keeping them firmly leveled at the thugs. The message was universally understood. Any sudden movement would result in an immediate fatal response. Logan spun around, his frantic eyes darting from the laser sights to my approaching figure. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over Naomi and her discarded clothing. "Malcolm," he stammered, holding his good arm up defensively. "This is a misunderstanding. She just needs to sign a car over to me. It is a marital asset. You cannot interfere with a legal marital asset." I stopped exactly 10 feet away from the pathetic, trembling man who had tried to steal my empire. "You do not have any marital assets, Logan," I said, my voice carrying the freezing, absolute authority of a man who held all the cards. "You have a forged lease agreement and $300,000 in gambling debts to a violent syndicate. The Mercedes you are trying to steal is currently parked in a secure impound lot owned by my logistics company. It is titled to a blind trust, and you will never touch it." The lead thug holding the baseball bat glared at me, his jaw clenched. "Look, old man, we are just here to collect what this rat owes the boss. We do not want a war with your corporate bodyguards. He promised us a $60,000 car to cover the interest." I looked at the thug with cold, professional detachment. "You are working for Marco Vance down in the warehouse district, are you not?" I asked. The thug widened his eyes in shock, confirming my intelligence report. Vincent opened his silver briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed financial ledgers, handing them directly to the thug. "Your boss is a mid-level bookie running a small-time operation. Logan does not just owe Marco, he owes the primary syndicate out of Miami. He is into them for over $250,000. I took a step closer to the thugs, ignoring Logan completely. "The only reason Logan brought you here to steal a car is because the Miami syndicate gave him exactly 48 hours to deliver the principal sum before they send a real cleanup crew to strip his organs for the black market. He is trying to pay you off with stolen property so you will protect him from the cartel. You are acting as his human shields, and he is not paying you nearly enough to take a bullet from a Miami hitman." Logan's face turned this color of wet ash. "No," he screamed, stepping backward. "They are lying. I just owe Marco. Do not listen to him." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone, displaying a live tracking application. Vincent already sent Logan current GPS coordinates and the license plate numbers of your two sedans directly to the Miami syndicate burner phones, I informed the thugs, my tone completely conversational. "They are roughly 10 minutes away. If you are standing next to this man when they arrive, they will assume you are actively hiding their money. I highly suggest you drop the sporting equipment and leave the park immediately." The lead thug looked at the financial ledgers in his hand, then looked at the red laser dot still resting firmly on his chest. He did not need a degree in finance to calculate the lethal risk-to-reward ratio of standing between me and a cartel hit squad. He dropped the baseball bat onto the damp grass. "You set us up, you miserable piece of garbage," he growled, turning his massive frame toward Logan. "You tried to use us to block the Miami crew." Logan shrieked and tried to run toward the street, but his dislocated shoulder severely hampered his balance. The two other thugs lunged forward, grabbing him by his collar and his belt, dragging him ruthlessly across the mud. "We are not taking the heat for your deadbeat bets," the lead thug spat, aiming a brutal kick at Logan's ribs. "We are going to drive you directly to the interstate and hand-deliver you to the Miami crew ourselves. Maybe they will forgive your interest if we gift-wrap you for them." Logan screamed, thrashing wildly as they dragged him toward the unmarked black sedans. "Malcolm, please," he begged, fresh tears streaming down his bruised face. "You have millions. Pay them off. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. Please do not let them take me. They are going to kill me." I watched him being thrown into the back of the sedan with complete, absolute apathy. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single dime. The doors slammed shut, the engines roared to life, and the vehicles sped away, leaving deep, muddy tire tracks in the grass. The parasite was permanently removed from our lives. The roar of the engines faded into the distance, leaving the park in a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the sound of the morning wind. My security team lowered their weapons, holstering them with practiced, synchronized efficiency. Vincent snapped his briefcase shut and took a respectful step back, giving me the floor. I turned around and looked down at my daughter. Naomi was still kneeling in the cold, wet mud, surrounded by her scattered, ruined clothing. The arrogant, entitled socialite who had demanded my absence to protect her pristine image was completely gone. She looked up at me, her face smeared with dirt and tears shivering violently in the morning air. She did not ask for money. She did not demand an explanation. She slowly crawled forward across the damp grass, wrapped her freezing hands around the hem of my tailored wool coat, and pressed her forehead against my polished shoes. "I was wrong, Dad," she sobbed, her voice cracking with the absolute agonizing weight of total surrender. "You were right about him. You were right about everything. I lost it all." I looked down at the broken woman clinging to my wet coat. I did not pull her up or offer a comforting embrace. I simply signaled to Vincent. He stepped forward, opening his sleek silver briefcase right there in the damp morning air, and extracted the single sheet of paper I had presented to her in the Escalade hours ago. The terms remained completely non-negotiable. She would surrender all claims to my estate, my trusts, and any future financial assistance. In exchange, I would prepay for exactly 30 days at the crumbling motel down the street, and she would accept a minimum wage job I had arranged for her. There were no safety nets. There were no second chances. Naomi did not argue. She did not negotiate or demand to read the fine print. She wiped the mud and tears from her face, took the silver pen Vincent offered, and signed her name with a violently shaking hand. The arrogant socialite was officially legally severed from my empire. I gave a slight nod to my security detail. They picked up her ruined canvas bags and tossed them into the back of one of the SUVs. "Get in the car, Naomi," I ordered. "Your shift starts in 2 hours." I did not drive her to a boutique bakery or a trendy downtown cafe. I had Vincent arrange a position at a massive, high-volume industrial catering kitchen located in the grittiest sector of the city. It was a facility that supplied thousands of meals daily to local hospitals and public schools. What Naomi did not know, and would not know for a very long time, was that Vanguard Holdings, LLC, owned the entire catering conglomerate. To the shift manager, a hardened, no-nonsense woman named Brenda, Naomi was just another desperate temp worker who needed to be broken in. When Naomi walked through the heavy metal double doors, she was instantly hit by a wall of suffocating heat, the deafening roar of industrial dishwashers, and the pungent smell of boiled vegetables and heavy degreaser. Brenda handed her a stiff, oversized hairnet, a heavy rubber apron, and a pair of thick, elbow-length yellow gloves. "Your station is the deep sink," Brenda barked, pointing to a massive stainless steel basin overflowing with charred baking sheets and grease-coated industrial pots. "You scrape, you scrub, you sanitize. You get one 15-minute break every 4 hours. If you drop a plate, it comes out of your paycheck." Naomi stood paralyzed, staring at the mountain of filth. Just a week ago, she was complaining to a private chef about the temperature of her truffle omelet. Now she was staring at the absolute bottom of the food chain. She hesitated, looking back at the heavy metal doors as if contemplating a desperate escape. But there was nowhere to run. Logan was gone. Her friends had abandoned her. My wallet was permanently closed. She slowly pulled the rubber apron over her head, walked up to the steaming sink, and plunged her hands into the scalding, greasy water. I watched the first 3 hours of her shift through the high-definition security cameras from the comfort of my penthouse. I watched my daughter sweat. I watched her struggle to lift heavy iron pots that strained her back. I watched Brenda yell at her for moving too slowly. I watched a towering stack of dirty plates collapse, splattering hot, dirty dishwater directly across her face and her uniform. She did not run to the bathroom to cry. She did not quit. She simply wiped the filthy water from her eyes with the back of her rubber glove, picked up a steel wool sponge, and kept scrubbing. The brutal, unforgiving mechanics of manual labor were systematically burning away the last remnants of her entitlement. The real education, however, did not come from the scalding water or the aching muscles. It came exactly 2 weeks later when the kitchen manager handed Naomi her very first physical paycheck. It was a flimsy piece of paper representing 80 hours of back-breaking, exhausting labor. After taxes, the net total was a fraction of what she used to spend on a single pair of designer shoes. I sat in my parked vehicle across the street from the check-cashing storefront and watched her walk out holding a small, thin envelope of cash. I had paid for exactly 30 days at her motel. She was now acutely aware that day 31 was rapidly approaching. She walked directly to a discount grocery store, and I watched her meticulously calculate the price of canned soup, generic bread, and instant coffee. She stood in the aisle holding a piece of fresh fruit, staring at the price tag for a long minute before slowly putting it back on the shelf. The agony of financial reality was finally taking root. She was learning the profound, undeniable difference between swiping a black card backed by a phantom fortune and trading her own physical pain for a fistful of dollar bills. Every cent she held was paid for in blisters, burns, and total exhaustion. Money was no longer an abstract concept or a magical right. It was absolute survival. As the grueling weeks progressed, a remarkable transformation began to take shape. The complaining stopped entirely. The defeated slouch in her shoulders was replaced by a rigid, determined posture. She started arriving at the industrial kitchen 10 minutes early, her uniform scrubbed clean by hand in her motel sink. She stopped looking at the clock and started focusing on the rhythm of the work. When Brenda demanded the pots be scrubbed twice, Naomi scrubbed them 3 times without a single word of protest. She earned the quiet, grudging respect of the other line workers who were immigrants and single mothers who knew exactly what it meant to fight for survival. She ate her lunch with them on overturned milk crates in the back alley, listening to their stories completely stripped of her buckhead arrogance. She was no longer the center of the universe. She was part of a team pulling her own weight, carrying her own load. The spoiled girl was dead. A resilient, grounded woman was emerging from the grease and the steam, finding genuine, unshakable dignity at the absolute bottom. It was a Tuesday afternoon, precisely 28 days into her harsh new reality. Naomi was hauling a massive stack of sanitized trays out of the industrial washer, wiping sweat from her forehead with her forearm. The heavy double doors of the kitchen did not just swing open. They were violently pushed apart. 4 men in dark windbreakers and tactical gear marched directly onto the wet tile floor, ignoring the shouting manager. They wore golden badges clipped to their belts. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The lead agent bypassed the line cooks and walked straight to the dish pit, fixing his eyes entirely on my daughter, Naomi Wright. He announced, his voice cutting over the roar of the machinery. Logan Pierce was apprehended yesterday by federal authorities in Miami. He has formally named you as his primary co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar wire fraud operation. You are under arrest. Put your hands behind your back. The cold, sterile environment of the federal courthouse was a stark contrast to the humid, chaotic kitchen where Naomi had been arrested just weeks prior. She sat at the defense table wearing a simple navy suit provided by Vincent Russo, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The charge was severe: conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud. The prosecuting attorney, a relentless man with a reputation for securing maximum sentences, had painted a devastating picture during his opening statement. He characterized Naomi not as a victim of her husband's deception, but as a willing, greedy accomplice who actively participated in laundering hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain a life of unimaginable luxury. If convicted, she was staring down the barrel of a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. The sheer weight of that reality pressed down on her, threatening to crush the newfound resilience she had built over the past month. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my expression entirely unreadable, flanked by a team of junior associates from Vanguard Holdings' legal division. We were not here to negotiate a plea deal. We were here to dismantle the prosecution's case with surgical precision. The prosecution's star witness was inevitably Logan Pierce. He walked to the witness stand wearing a crisp gray suit, his hair perfectly styled, projecting the image of a broken, contrite man who had been led astray by a demanding wife. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and then proceeded to lie with the practiced, sociopathic ease of a lifelong con artist. Under the gentle questioning of the prosecutor, Logan spun a masterful narrative. He claimed that the massive debts to the underground betting syndicate were incurred solely to fund Naomi's out-of-control spending habits. He testified that she constantly demanded expensive jewelry, lavish vacations, and a $50,000 monthly lifestyle that his legitimate business could not support. He stated under oath that she was fully aware of the fraudulent offshore accounts and had personally instructed him to forge her signature to shield herself from legal liability. He looked directly at the jury, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and played the victim perfectly. I tried to stop her. He whispered, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. I told her the money wasn't real, that we were going to get caught, but she said her father would bail us out if anything went wrong. She said we were untouchable. Naomi gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles turning white, but she did not outburst or interrupt. The month she spent scrubbing pots in the industrial kitchen had taught her the value of discipline. She watched the man she had once loved, the man she had abandoned me for, systematically try to destroy her life to save his own skin, It was a brutal, agonizing education, but it was necessary. When the prosecutor finished, Vincent Russo stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not carry a notepad or approach the witness stand immediately. He walked to the center of the courtroom, exuding the kind of lethal, predatory confidence that makes opposing counsel instantly nervous. He did not object to Logan's testimony. He did not attempt to characterize him as a liar. He simply requested permission from the judge to present a series of digital forensic exhibits to the court. Your Honor. Vincent began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. The prosecution has presented a compelling narrative based entirely on the testimony of a man facing decades in prison for admitted wire fraud and illegal gambling. We do not intend to argue about character or intent. We intend to present absolute, undeniable digital facts. Vincent signaled to his associate, who activated a large screen facing the jury box. What you are looking at, Vincent continued, turning toward the screen, is a comprehensive metadata analysis of every single fraudulent wire transfer executed in this case. The prosecution claims that Mrs. Pierce was the architect of these transfers, dictating them from her Buckhead residence. However, the IP addresses, the unique digital fingerprints for every single one of these illegal transactions, do not trace back to the Buckhead mansion. Vincent paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering the killing blow. They trace back to a specific IP address registered to an apartment in Midtown Atlanta, an apartment leased under the name of Ms. Sarah Jenkins. Logan's carefully constructed facade cracked instantly. The color drained from his face, and he gripped the edges of the witness stand, his eyes darting frantically toward the prosecution table. Vincent walked slowly toward the witness stand, his gaze locked on Logan. Mr. Pierce, isn't it true that Sarah Jenkins is not a business associate? Isn't it true that she is your mistress, and that you have been secretly maintaining a second family with her in that Midtown apartment for the past 3 years? Isn't it true that every single fraudulent transfer used to pay your gambling debts was executed from her laptop on her network while my client was completely unaware? Objection, the prosecutor shouted, jumping to his feet. Relevance. It goes directly to the credibility of the witness and the physical location of the crime. Your Honor, Vincent countered smoothly, not taking his eyes off Logan. Overruled, the judge stated, leaning forward with sudden intense interest. You may answer the question, Mr. Pierce. Logan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The jury watched him sweat, the illusion of the victimized husband evaporating before their eyes. The digital evidence was irrefutable. It placed the execution of the crime miles away from Naomi, directly in the hands of Logan and his secret life. Vincent had not just defended Naomi. He had effectively destroyed the prosecution's entire narrative using nothing but hard data. I have no further questions for this witness, Vincent said, turning his back on Logan with absolute dismissal. The prosecutor looked visibly shaken, hastily flipping through his notes, realizing his star witness had just been neutralized. The judge dismissed Logan, who practically ran from the witness stand, refusing to look at Naomi or anyone in the gallery. The prosecution requested a brief recess to confer, clearly scrambling to salvage their crumbling case. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The prosecutor stood up, his confidence noticeably diminished, and announced his next witness. The prosecution calls Sarah Jenkins to the stand. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom as the heavy wooden doors at the back opened. A blonde woman clutching a cheap purse walked nervously down the aisle. She avoided making eye contact with Logan, who was now sitting at the prosecution table looking absolutely terrified. She took the stand, swore the oath, and looked directly at the prosecutor. She had been subpoenaed, and she was clearly terrified. Ms. Jenkins, the prosecutor began, his tone sharp. Have you been offered an immunity deal by the federal government in exchange for your truthful testimony today regarding the fraudulent wire transfers executed from your residence? Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I have. Sarah Jenkins did not hold back. Under oath, she confessed to everything. She detailed how Logan used her laptop to wire funds, how he bragged about draining his father-in-law's accounts, and how he forged Naomi's signature while she was asleep. The federal prosecutor had no choice but to drop all charges against my daughter right there in the courtroom. Naomi was officially exonerated, but a cornered rat will always bite, and Logan was backed into the ultimate corner. Seeing his criminal defense obliterate, his attorney desperately attempted a final civil maneuver. In a separate emergency family court hearing filed concurrently with the federal sentencing, Logan's legal counsel played his last pathetic card. The slick, desperate lawyer stood before the family court judge demanding an immediate, equitable division of marital assets. Your Honor, The lawyer argued, sweating under the courtroom lights. My client recognizes his impending federal incarceration. However, he remains legally married to Naomi Pierce. We are formally filing for divorce and demanding 50% of her total assets. The defense requests half of the Vanguard Holdings Trust, the Buckhead Estate equity, and the logistics company shares. My client is entitled to massive spousal support and half of her vast inherited wealth to cover his legal restitutions. I sat in the gallery of the family court next to Vincent Russo and smiled. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. Vincent stood up, smoothing his impeccably tailored suit, and approached the judge's bench. He did not look angry. He looked like an apex predator who had just trapped its prey. "Your Honor," Vincent stated, his voice echoing with absolute authority, "opposing counsel is operating under a profound and frankly embarrassing delusion regarding Mrs. Pierce's financial status. My client does not own a single share of Vanguard Holdings. She does not own the Buckhead Estate. In fact, she does not have a trust fund." Vincent opened his silver briefcase and withdrew a pristine legal document sealed in a blue folder. He handed a copy to the judge and another to Logan's visibly trembling attorney. 5 years ago, when Naomi and Logan were engaged, my client, Mr. Malcolm Wright, mandated an ironclad prenuptial agreement as a strict condition of her continued access to his wealth. It specifically stated that any assets, properties, or capital provided by Mr. Wright remained his sole corporate property. Furthermore, any debt acquired by either party during the marriage would remain strictly individual. Logan stared at the document, his face turning the color of wet ash. But the brutal unmasking did not stop there. Vincent pulled out a second document. This one was crumpled, slightly stained with mud from a rainy morning at a cheap motel. "And if opposing counsel requires further clarification," Vincent continued, his voice dropping to a lethal calm, "we present this voluntary relinquishment of inheritance, signed by Naomi Pierce exactly 35 days ago. In this legally binding contract, she willfully surrendered all current and future claims to the Wright estate, any associated trusts, and all financial assistance. She severed herself completely from the family wealth." Logan leaped out of his chair, his handcuffs clinking loudly against the heavy wooden table. "That is a lie," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "She is a billionaire heiress. You are hiding the money. You cannot do this to me. I need that money to pay the syndicate." The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order in the court, but Vincent simply turned to face Logan. "We are hiding nothing," Vincent replied coldly. "You tried to bleed a stone, Logan." The legal trap had snapped shut with absolute flawless precision. Logan had banked his entire survival on the assumption that Naomi was a walking gold mine. He had assumed his marriage certificate was a blank check he could cash when the federal government and the underground bookies came collecting. He was completely wrong. The judge reviewed the documents, adjusting his glasses before looking down at Logan with a mixture of pity and extreme disgust. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said, his voice ringing with finality, "these documents are airtight. Mrs. Pierce is currently employed as a minimum wage dishwasher at an industrial catering facility. Her verified net worth is exactly $0. She owns no property, has no trust, and possesses zero liquid assets. Under the law, you are entitled to exactly 50% of her wealth. 50% of zero is zero. The syndicate debt, the federal restitution, the staggering legal fees, they are entirely yours. You will not receive a single cent from Naomi Pierce or the Wright estate." The courtroom fell completely silent. The sheer magnitude of Logan's defeat hung in the heavy air. He had thrown away a luxurious life, destroyed his marriage, betrayed his family, and risked the wrath of violent cartel bosses, all for a fortune he never actually had access to. He had played a high-stakes game of chess against a man who owned the entire board. I watched from the gallery as the reality of his absolute poverty crashed over him. He had nothing left to leverage, no secret accounts to drain, no wealthy wife to extort. The master manipulator had been thoroughly and permanently outplayed by the very people he thought he could discard so easily. The family court proceedings were swiftly dismissed, effectively leaving Logan destitute just hours before his federal sentencing. When we transitioned back to the federal courtroom for the final criminal judgment, the atmosphere was heavy with impending doom. The federal judge, a stern woman who had zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, looked down from her high bench. "Logan Pierce, you orchestrated a sophisticated wire fraud scheme, embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars, and attempted to frame your own wife to escape accountability. You manipulated the medical and legal systems for sheer greed. Your actions display a staggering lack of remorse and a predatory nature that this court cannot ignore." She raised her gavel, holding it suspended for a fraction of a second. "For the charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to all defrauded parties." The gavel slammed down, hitting the sounding block with a sharp, violent crack that echoed like a gunshot across the silent room. The heavy sound of the gavel shattered the last remaining pieces of Logan's sanity. He collapsed against the defense table, thrashing wildly as two massive federal marshals grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back. "No!" he shrieked, his voice tearing through the quiet courtroom. "You cannot do this to me. I will not survive in there. Naomi, help me." He thrashed and kicked the metal chains of his handcuffs, rattling loudly as the marshals dragged him backward toward the holding cell doors. Naomi stood perfectly still at the defense table. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She watched the man who had tried to destroy her life being hauled away to a cage. Her face was a mask of beautiful, untouchable stoicism. She did not shed a single tear. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung shut, cutting off the frantic echoes of Logan begging for a mercy he never earned. I walked shoulder to shoulder with my daughter down the long marble corridor of the courthouse. The silence between us was profound. It was not the tense, suffocating quiet of a fractured family, but the clean, empty stillness that follows a devastating hurricane. We pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the crisp Atlanta afternoon. The glaring sunlight hit our faces, washing away the stale, sterile air of the legal system. Dozens of reporters had gathered near the bottom of the concrete steps, hunting for a sensational quote about the disgraced tech founder and his sudden spectacular downfall. Vincent Russo intercepted them immediately, forming a flawless legal barricade. He directed the press toward his prepared statements, allowing Naomi and me to walk unimpeded toward the street. My armored black Cadillac Escalade was idling smoothly at the curb right in front of the courthouse plaza. The driver stepped out, instantly opening the heavy rear door and standing at attention. I turned to my daughter, gesturing toward the plush leather interior that represented absolute safety and endless financial security. "Get in, Naomi," I said, my tone softening into something resembling parental warmth for the first time in months. "The trial is over. You survived. I will take you back to my penthouse. You can take a hot shower, order whatever you want from room service, and sleep for 2 days. We will figure out your next steps tomorrow." Naomi stopped on the bottom step and looked at the gleaming luxury vehicle. A month ago, she would have sprinted into the back seat, demanding a glass of champagne and a spa appointment to soothe her frayed nerves. She would have instantly reverted to the spoiled socialite, eager to forget the unpleasantness of reality. Today, she simply adjusted the strap of her cheap canvas bag over her shoulder. She looked at the plush leather seats and then shook her head. "No, thank you, Dad," she replied, her voice steady and entirely devoid of hesitation. "I appreciate the offer, but I cannot go to your penthouse." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by the immediate rejection. "The trial is finished, Naomi. The lesson is over. You do not have to punish yourself anymore." "It is not a punishment, Dad," she corrected me, looking directly into my eyes with a fierce, grounding clarity. "It is a Tuesday. I am scheduled for the afternoon prep shift at the catering kitchen in 45 minutes. Brenda is already short-staffed on the dish pit today, and if I do not show up, my co-workers will have to pull double duty hauling those iron pots. I gave them my word that I would be there for the dinner rush." She pointed down the busy street toward a rusted bus stop sign. "The number 42 bus arrives in 6 minutes. It drops me off 2 blocks from the loading dock. I will see you on Sunday for coffee if you are free." Before I could formulate a response, she turned around and walked away. I stood frozen on this courthouse sidewalk, the heavy door of my Escalade still held open by my driver. I watched my daughter merge into the crowd of ordinary citizens walking purposefully toward the dirty, crowded bus shelter. She did not look back. She did not ask for $20 to cover her bus fare. She simply stood in line with a group of tired commuters waiting patiently for public transportation. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a swelling, overwhelming wave of absolute pride completely wash over me. The spoiled, entitled girl who had demanded I leave her mansion because my smoke-ruined clothes offended her aesthetic was officially dead and buried. The woman standing at that bus stop was a survivor. She had faced federal indictment, betrayal, public humiliation, and absolute poverty, and it had not broken her. Instead, the fire had forged her into something unbreakable. She had chosen a grueling minimum wage dishwashing shift over a luxury penthouse because she finally understood the sacred gravity of personal responsibility. She valued the word she gave to her working-class team members more than the easy comfort of my wealth. I remembered my late wife Camille holding my hand in her final hours, begging me not to raise a parasite. I had taken the hardest, most ruthless path possible to honor that promise. I had broken my daughter down to the absolute studs, forcing her to rebuild her own foundation from the mud. It was an agonizing gamble, but observing her step onto that crowded city bus, paying her own fare with coins she earned through physical pain, I knew the gamble had paid off entirely. She had shed the toxic skin of her former life completely. Logan's world of fake money and leased power was a distant memory. She was now a woman who understood that true wealth is the ability to stand on your own 2 feet when the entire world collapses around you. I signaled to my driver to close the door. I did not need to rescue her anymore. She had officially rescued herself. I stepped into the quiet, climate-controlled cabin of my vehicle, leaning back against the leather seat as the driver pulled away from the courthouse. The heavy tint of the windows blocked out the glaring afternoon sun. I was just beginning to process the magnitude of the day victories when my secure smartphone vibrated in the breast pocket of my suit. I pulled it out and checked the caller ID. It was a direct line from Zenith National Insurance, the firm underwriting the massive policy on my burned-down townhouse. I answered the call immediately. Mr. Wright, a crisp, professional voice spoke over the line. This is David Aris, Senior Claims Adjuster for Zenith. I am calling to officially conclude the investigation regarding the electrical fire at your primary residence. Our forensic arson team and the Atlanta Fire Department have officially ruled the incident an accidental structural failure due to outdated wiring. There is no evidence of foul play. I nodded silently, listening to the rhythmic hum of the Escalade engine. Go on, David. We have fully approved your comprehensive loss claim. The adjuster continued, sounding relieved to close such a massive file. The total replacement value for the structure and your insured personal assets has been authorized. The funds are being wired directly into your primary Vanguard Holdings trust account as we speak. You should see the complete transfer reflect in your balance within the next 2 hours. We apologize for the length of the investigation and hope this settlement helps you rebuild. I ended the call and immediately opened the encrypted banking portal on my phone. I watched the screen refresh, the loading icon spinning for a fraction of a second before the new account balance materialized. A massive 8-figure deposit had just cleared, hitting my primary ledger with a silent digital thud. The insurance payout for the ashes of my old life was officially secured. I locked the screen and smiled a slow, dangerous smile. Logan was rotting in a federal cell and Naomi was finally standing on her own 2 feet. The slate was completely clean, but I was not finished. This massive injection of liquid capital was not going to sit idle in an offshore account. It was the exact seed money I needed to execute my final masterstroke and reshape the entire battlefield forever. Exactly 365 days passed since the gavel fell in that federal courtroom. The changing of the seasons marked a brutal but magnificent transformation. Naomi was no longer scrubbing charred baking sheets in the humid dish pit of my industrial catering facility. She had earned 3 consecutive promotions through sheer unrelenting grit. Today, she was the senior shift manager overseeing logistics inventory and a crew of 45 employees. She did not wear silk pajamas anymore. Her daily uniform consisted of non-slip steel-toed shoes, dark denim, and a neat polo shirt bearing her name tag. She lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of Atlanta. The rent was exactly $1,200 a month, and she paid it entirely from her own checking account on the first day of every month without fail. Her living room was tiny, holding a second-hand sofa and a modest television, but it was meticulously clean. The floors were swept, the counters were spotless, and the air smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh laundry. She owned every single item in that small space. There were no leased sports cars in the driveway, and no fake tech founders sleeping in her bed. There was only absolute, unshakable independence. I parked a standard, unassuming sedan on the street outside her apartment complex. I did not bring the armored Escalade. I did not bring Vincent Russo or my tactical security detail. Today I was not a corporate titan executing a hostile takeover. I was simply a father visiting his daughter on a Sunday afternoon. I walked up the 2 flights of exterior concrete stairs carrying a warm cardboard box from a local bakery. It was a spiced peach pie, the exact kind Camille used to bake when we first started out with nothing but a dream and an empty bank account. I knocked on the wooden door, listening to the deadbolt click open from the inside. Naomi stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She looked tired but healthy. Her skin had a natural color and her eyes were bright, unclouded by the desperate anxiety of her past life. She smiled a genuine, relaxed smile and stepped aside to let me in. "Dad, it is good to see you," she said, gesturing toward her small kitchen table. "Come in. I just finished organizing the employee schedules for next week." I stepped into the modest apartment, taking in the stark contrast to the sprawling Buckhead mansion. There were no grand chandeliers or imported marble floors, but this space held 10 times the value because it was real. I set the bakery box down on the laminate counter. "I brought dessert," I announced, taking off my coat. "Your mother always said a Sunday visit required a proper peace offering." Naomi laughed, a soft, grounded sound. She opened her cabinets, pulling out 2 simple ceramic mugs. "I hope you do not mind standard drip coffee," she said, pouring the dark liquid from a basic glass pot. "I do not have a fancy espresso machine anymore." I pulled out a wooden chair and sat down, feeling completely at home. "Standard drip is exactly what built my logistics empire, Naomi. I prefer it." She cut 2 slices of the peach pie, placing them on basic white plates, and sat across from me. We ate in a comfortable, companionable silence. The tension that used to choke every single interaction we had was completely gone. We were no longer playing a twisted game of manipulation and resentment. We were 2 adults sharing a meal earned through honest labor. I took a sip of the hot, cheap coffee, savoring the bitter, earthy taste. "Your shift supervisor sent me your quarterly performance review last week. I mentioned keeping my tone professional but warm. Your inventory loss margins are the lowest the facility has seen in 4 years. You managed to cut food waste by 19% simply by restructuring the morning delivery schedules." Naomi nodded, taking a bite of her pie. "It was a matter of basic efficiency, Dad. The previous manager was ordering perishable supplies blindly without checking the daily hospital quotas. I implemented a strict tracking system. If we do not need it, we do not order it. Every dollar wasted on spoiled produce is a dollar stolen from the workers' bonus pool." I looked at her, truly amazed by the profound shift in her perspective. A year ago, she was charging $10,000 spa weekends to a black card without a second thought. Now she was fiercely protecting the bonus pool of working-class kitchen staff. "You learned how to respect the margins," I observed proudly. "I learned how to respect the work," Naomi corrected me, looking directly into my eyes. "When you are the one hauling the garbage bags to the dumpster at 2 in the morning, you stop tolerating inefficiency. You realize that money is not an abstract concept, it is physical energy." Logan never understood that. He thought money was just numbers on a screen meant to be manipulated. I set my mug down, hearing her speak her ex-husband name without a single tremor of fear or regret. "Logan is currently adjusting to the reality of the federal prison commissary," I stated flatly. "He will have 15 years to think about his accounting methods." Naomi did not flinch. She simply took another sip of her coffee. "I do not think about him anymore," she admitted, her voice completely devoid of bitterness. "He was a symptom of a much larger disease I was carrying. The arrogance, the absolute blindness. I let him into my life because I thought I was too important to ever fail." She placed her hands flat on the table, leaning forward. Her expression grew incredibly serious, carrying the weight of total accountability. "Dad, I need to say something to you. I have wanted to say this for a very long time, but I needed to earn the right to say it first." I remained silent, giving her the floor completely. "I am deeply, profoundly sorry," Naomi said, her voice ringing with absolute sincerity. "I am sorry for how I treated you. I am sorry I turned you away in the rain. I am sorry I viewed you as a walking bank account instead of my father. You worked your entire life to honor Mom memory, and I took your generosity and turned it into poison. I was a parasite." I looked at my daughter, seeing the ghost of Camille in her strong, resilient posture. I did not offer a polite dismissal of her apology. I accepted it because she had bled to deliver it. "You were Naomi," I agreed softly. "But you are not anymore. You paid your debts. You stood in the mud and you washed yourself clean. You earned my respect." Naomi smiled, brushing a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. She looked around her small, quiet apartment, taking in the cheap furniture and the scuffed laminate floors. She possessed nothing of luxury, but she radiated absolute, unshakable power. She looked back at me, her eyes shining with a strange, beautiful clarity. "You know, Dad," she whispered, picking up her coffee mug, "I used to curse the universe for taking my perfect life away. I used to hate you for locking me out. But sitting here right now, paying my own rent with my own sweat, I finally understand the truth." She took a slow sip of the dark, bitter coffee and smiled a dangerous, brilliant smile. Thank you for the fire. If the house had not burned down, I would still be blind. The heavy oak doors of Vanguard Holdings' legal division closed behind me, sealing off the quiet hum of downtown Atlanta. I walked into Vincent Russo's corner office, dropping my overcoat onto a leather chair. The massive glass windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the same skyline where Logan had tried to break my spirit and steal my empire. Vincent was already sitting behind his polished mahogany desk, a thick stack of pristine legal documents fanned out before him. The insurance payout had completely cleared, settling comfortably into the primary trust account. The capital was fully liquid and ready to be deployed. I sat down across from my oldest friend and most ruthless legal architect. We had spent the last 2 hours finalizing the complete restructuring of my estate. The old will, the one drafted when Naomi was a teenager and Camille was still alive, had been permanently shredded. The new blueprint was radical, unprecedented, and entirely bulletproof. Malcolm Vincent began adjusting his glasses and tapping a silver pen against the desk. You are absolutely certain about the execution of this primary clause. We are completely liquidating your personal holdings, the real estate portfolio, the logistics company shares, and the accumulated liquid capital. Every single asset is being irrevocably transferred into a newly formed corporate entity. I am entirely certain, Vincent, I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. I did not spend 30 years building an empire just to leave behind a gilded cage for the next generation. Wealth without purpose is a disease. Vincent nodded, turning to the next page of the thick dossier. The Camille Wright Foundation for Financial Abuse Survivors is officially incorporated as a registered, non-profit organization. The entire multi-million-dollar insurance payout from your burned-down townhouse has already been injected as the initial seed funding. The foundation will provide comprehensive legal representation, emergency housing, and financial literacy education for women who have been systematically stripped of their assets by abusive or fraudulent partners. It is a massive undertaking, Malcolm. The operating budget alone will exceed $4 million annually. It is exactly what Camille would have wanted, I stated, leaning forward and resting my hands on the cool glass of the desk, and it is exactly what this city needs. Logan is not an isolated anomaly. There are thousands of arrogant, parasitic men out there leveraging the legal system and emotional manipulation to destroy women's lives. The foundation will hunt them down and dismantle their financial infrastructure just like we did to him. Vincent slid a separate document across the desk toward me. This one was a detailed employment contract completely distinct from the estate transfer papers. And the executive leadership of this foundation, Vincent asked, a slight knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I picked up the employment contract, scanning the rigorous performance metrics and strict operational guidelines I had personally drafted. I am appointing Naomi Wright as the executive director of the foundation, I announced. But she is not inheriting the role. She is being hired. Vincent leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. Explain the operational parameters to me one more time, just so we are absolutely clear for the record. She does not get a single dime of the principal endowment, I explained, my tone dropping to a cold, calculating register. She will receive a competitive executive salary, but it is entirely contingent on the foundation quarterly performance metrics. If she fails to secure corporate grants, if she mismanages the operational budget, or if the foundation fails to assist the projected quota of survivors, her salary will be aggressively penalized. If she proves she cannot handle the responsibility, the independent board of directors has the absolute legal authority to terminate her employment immediately. Vincent chuckled, a low, appreciative sound of pure professional admiration. It is a brilliant structure, Malcolm. You are not leaving her a fortune. You are leaving her a monumental responsibility. You are forcing her to build her own wealth by saving women who are trapped in the exact same nightmare she barely survived. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. I gave her the world once, and it nearly destroyed her, I murmured. I will not make that mistake again. I am giving her a battlefield. She knows what it feels like to be stripped of everything, to be terrified and entirely alone. She knows how men like Logan operate. She will be the most ruthless, effective director this foundation could possibly have because she is fueled by absolute, genuine survival instinct. Vincent pulled the final signature page from the stack and placed it precisely in the center of the desk right in front of me. He uncapped the silver pen and handed it over. The trusts are sealed, the foundation is funded, and the employment contract is active. All that is required is your final authorization. I took the pen, feeling the cool, heavy metal in my hand. For the last year, I had orchestrated a brutal, agonizing war to tear down the rotten illusions my daughter had built around herself. I had watched her hit rock-bottom scrub floors and claw her way back to dignity. I had burned down the past to ensure a future that was actually worth living. I looked at the signature line, feeling an immense, overwhelming sense of profound peace. I pressed the pen to the heavy parchment and signed my name. The ink settled permanently into the page, officially securing my legacy. I left the towering glass and steel architecture of Vanguard Holdings behind and drove my armored Escalade through the shifting landscape of the city. The route was deeply familiar, taking me away from the financial district and back toward the quiet, unassuming suburb where my life had abruptly, violently changed course exactly 1 year ago. I parked the heavy vehicle against the curb, stepping out into the mild afternoon air. I stood on the edge of the property where my modest townhouse had once stood. There was no charred wood, no melted plastic, and no suffocating smell of smoke. The debris had been meticulously cleared away months ago, leaving a flat, rectangular plot of dark, fertile earth. But it was not empty. The insurance payout had funded the foundation, and my personal capital had funded this final, quiet project. I walked past a low, wrought iron fence that now bordered the property. The lot was actively being transformed into a vibrant, sprawling community garden. Raised cedar planter boxes were arranged in neat, symmetrical rows filled with dark, rich topsoil and the vibrant green shoots of early spring vegetables. A group of local teenagers from the neighborhood high school were hauling bags of mulch, laughing and working under the supervision of a retired botanist I had hired to manage the project. A small wooden pavilion stood near the back, offering shade and a resting place for the volunteer gardeners. A polished bronze plaque was affixed to the stone pillar near the entrance, reading "The Camille Wright Community Garden, Growth from the Ashes." I stood on the very spot where I had salvaged my lockbox, while the roof caved in, watching the teenagers harvest the first crop of the season. I walked over to one of the sturdy wooden benches under the pavilion and sat down, resting my hands on my knees. I watched the community thrive in the exact space where my past had been incinerated. The peace I felt in that moment was absolute and profound, a quiet, monumental victory earned through fire and iron discipline. I thought about the phone call with Naomi a year ago, the cruel dismissal, the demand that her comfort supersede my basic survival. I thought of Logan, arrogance, his pathetic threats, and his ultimate spectacular destruction in the federal courthouse. They had looked at me and seen a weak, foolish old man. They had assumed my generosity was an unbreakable obligation, a permanent pipeline they could bleed dry without consequence. They had weaponized the concept of family, using it as a shield to excuse their parasitism and their deceit. Family is a sacred bond, but it is not an unconditional excuse to endure abuse. It is not a free pass for exploitation. We are conditioned by society to forgive the unforgivable when it comes from our own blood, to absorb the toxic behavior of those we raised, because cutting them off feels like a violation of the natural order. But I had learned the hardest, most agonizing lesson a father could learn. Sometimes saving your child requires breaking them completely. Sometimes protecting your legacy means dismantling the entire corrupt structure your family has built around it. You cannot reason with a parasite, and you cannot negotiate with entitlement. You have to strip away the unearned luxury, the fake status, and the endless bailouts. Sometimes you have to be the one who lights the match yourself. You have to willingly burn down the rotten illusions, the comfortable lies, and the toxic expectations, so that something of genuine, tangible value can actually grow from the ashes. I had burned Naomi's false kingdom to the ground, and in doing so, I had finally given her the space to build a real one. I stood up from the wooden bench, smoothing the lapels of my tailored suit. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the raised planter boxes and the vibrant green leaves of the new crops. The teenagers were packing up their gardening tools, their laughter carrying across the quiet suburban street. I did not need to micromanage this garden, just as I no longer needed to micromanage my daughter's life. The foundation was secure, the legacy was protected, and the parasites had been permanently exterminated. I walked back toward my Escalade, my footsteps steady and purposeful on the concrete sidewalk. I unlocked the heavy armored door, sliding into the plush, quiet interior of the driver's seat. I started the engine, the powerful motor humming to life with a low, satisfying rumble. I put the vehicle in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the ashes of the past completely behind me. I drove toward the city skyline, the master of my own empire, entirely at peace. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. Reflecting on these intertwined narratives, one profound and unifying lesson clearly emerges: the catastrophic danger of confusing financial enabling with genuine love and the liberating power of establishing absolute boundaries. In many of these experiences, the protagonists fell into a heartbreaking but incredibly common trap, sacrificing their own peace, resources, and well-being to cushion the lives of their loved ones. They operated under the assumption that by endlessly giving, whether it was paying rent for ungrateful adult children, clearing mounting debts, funding lavish weddings, or subsidizing unsustainable lifestyles, they were proving their devotion. Society often conditions us to believe that family requires unconditional sacrifice no matter the personal cost. However, this unchecked generosity did not cultivate gratitude or deep connection. Instead, it bred a toxic, blind entitlement. It transformed those they loved into opportunistic parasites who viewed their benefactors not as human beings deserving of empathy and respect, but merely as inexhaustible financial resources. These stories starkly reveal that love simply cannot be purchased, and loyalty that is bought with a credit card will violently expire the exact moment the funds finally run dry. The true awakening for each of these individuals only arrived when they experienced a brutal, undeniable betrayal. Whether it was a public humiliation, a secret conversation overheard in the dead of night, or a shocking realization of calculated deceit, these moments of crisis shattered the fragile illusion of purchased affection. The crucial takeaway is that setting fierce, uncompromising boundaries is never an act of cruelty. Rather, it is the ultimate manifestation of self-respect. By decisively cutting the financial cords and withdrawing their safety nets, these protagonists force their abusers to step out of their comfortable delusions and face the unfiltered, harsh consequences of their own greed. Furthermore, these journeys highlight that hitting rock bottom is frequently the only cure for deep-seated entitlement. You cannot save people from themselves, and continually shielding toxic family members from the real-world consequences of their actions only corrupts their character further. True empowerment occurs when we stop sacrificing our own dignity just to maintain a superficial, toxic peace. When you bravely strip away the unearned luxury, the fake status, and the endless bailouts, you allow the rotten illusions to burn to the ground. It is only from those ashes that genuine respect, self-reliance, and authentic, healthy relationships can actually take root and grow. Ultimately, we are taught that family is defined by mutual respect, unshakable loyalty, and genuine care, not simply by shared blood or a legal certificate. It is never too late to rewrite your own narrative, to firmly demand the dignity you rightfully deserve, and to realize that sometimes the most profound demonstration of self-love is having the courage to walk away. If you have ever had to find the courage to set hard boundaries with toxic family members, share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more empowering stories.